Public Service Commission to order. Madam Secretary, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Thank you. Before we begin, I'd like to note that Commissioner Alisi will not be joining us today due to an excused absence. Before moving to the agenda, I need to conduct a roll call of commissioners. Commissioners, when I call your name, please confirm that you are present. Commissioner Valesky.
Present.
Commissioner Majori.
Present.
Commissioner Bright.
Here.
Commissioner Sheehan. I can confirm that Commissioner Sheehan is here. We'll work on her microphone. Commissioner Villova.
Present.
Thank you. Before we begin with the regular agenda, do any commissioners wish to recuse from voting on item 101, 401, 301, 302, or 501? Commissioner Valesky.
No recusals.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori.
No recusals.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright.
No recusals?
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
No recusals on the regular agenda.
Thank you. And Commissioner Villova.
No recusals.
So noted. Thank you. We'll now move to the regular agenda. Our first item for discussion, case 23-G-0225, case 23-G-0226, and case 23-G-0220, as it relates to the Brooklyn Union Gas Company and Keyspan Gas Energy Corporation gas rates. This will be presented today by Judge Maureen Leary. Judge James Costello, Mary Ann Sorrentino, Allison Manns, and Jeff Hogan are available for questions. Judge Leary, please begin.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, Commissioners and Chair. My name is Maureen Leary, and as the Chair noted, I am accompanied today by an amazing group of people without whom I probably would not be here today because of so much that has been going on in the case, which has been really an amazing experience. But I particularly want to thank at the outset our project sponsors, Allison Manns and Mary Ann Sorrentino, as well as Chief Judge Dakin Leakakes and my colleague, Jim Costello. I don't want to miss thanking them, as well as all of you for your input. I was assigned to preside over these rate proceedings with Judge Costello, and before you today is a draft order establishing gas delivery rate plans covering a 3-year period beginning on September 1st, 2024, and continuing until March 31st, 2027. These rate plans are for the Brooklyn Union Gas Company, which I will refer to as KEDNY when necessary, and the Keyspan East Corporation, which I will refer to as KEDLI. Collectively, they'll be referred to as the companies. The draft order, with certain minor corrections and one minor modification, adopts an April 2024 joint proposal representing a negotiated resolution to these proceedings by the companies, DPS staff, the City of New York, the Environmental Defense Fund, and NRG Energy. The Department of State Utility Intervention Unit participated in these proceedings and indicated that although not a signatory to the joint proposal, it would not oppose it. The parties opposing the JP include the Public Utilities Law Project, We Act for Environmental Justice, the Alliance for a Green Economy, All Our Energy, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Sane Energy Project, and individuals Margot Spindelman and Mary T. Finneran. All of the foregoing opposed the joint proposal and filed statements in opposition. I will very briefly review some of the background information, detail the company's revenue requirements and capital expenditures, and highlight certain noteworthy provisions of the draft order adopting the joint proposal. As you know, these cases were filed in April of 2023. They sought gas rates for 1 year, although the information filed covered the 3-year period for staff's consideration. After the parties filed testimony, the companies filed a notice of impending settlement in September of 2023. Those negotiations extended over approximately a 7-month period until the joint proposal's filing in April of this year. The administrative record of these cases is substantial, as are the public comments, which number nearly 1,100. Of note is that public notice and comment was extensive. Judge Costello, Judge Lee Cakes, and I oversaw 5 in-person public statement hearings at various locations in the company's respective service territories. We were often accompanied by members of the commission. We thank you for that participation. There was a high level of interest in those hearings, with many members of the public attending and providing vigorous comments. The comments were largely in opposition to the proposed rate increases, with commenters asserting, among other things, that proposed rates would be unaffordable and that the rate plans contained too much funding for the continued use of the company's gas infrastructure, with commenters claiming that these rate plans would be inconsistent with New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which I will refer to hereinafter often as the CLCPA. I'd like to take a moment to discuss the statutory framework and the standard of review governing these proceedings and the Commission's consideration of the joint proposal and this draft order. The Commission's first statutory obligation arises under Public Service Law Section 66. That requires the companies to provide safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates, and further requires that the Commission oversee that obligation. The Commission's second statutory obligation is under CLCPA Section 7 and is in 2 parts. The Commission must find that adoption of the joint proposal is consistent with and will not interfere with achieving the CLCPA's goals. The Commission also must find that the joint proposal's terms will not result in disproportionate impacts to disadvantaged communities in the company's service territories. These statutory parameters are complemented by the Commission's 1992 settlement guidelines, which established a public interest standard for considering a joint proposal that has been reached after arm's-length negotiations among parties, such as the joint proposal before you today. For more than 3 decades, the Commission has consistently applied this standard, that is the public interest standard, that is established in the guidelines. A negotiated joint proposal must be consistent with the environmental, social, and economic policies of the Commission and the state, and it must produce reasonable results that are within the range of those that would likely have arisen if the matter had been litigated. The Commission also considers the completeness of the record and whether the joint proposal is contested. The draft order before you concludes that the joint proposal, when viewed as a whole, produces a result that is in the public interest and is consistent with the applicable statutory framework as well as the Commission's settlement guidelines. I'm going to turn now, if I can ask for the PowerPoint to come up. The first page will give the Commission the relevant term and effective date of the joint proposal, which I've already mentioned, so I guess that's not going to happen. So the term of the rate plans runs from September 1st, 2024 through March 31st, 2027, but because rates should have been effective on April 1st, there is a make-whole provision that is retroactive from September 1st to April 1st, 2024. Those make-whole costs are recovered primarily in the first year of the rate plan. Next slide. This slide shows you the progression of the company's filing in the matter. I will not read all the numbers other than the last that was filed in rebuttal testimony on September 22nd, 2022, which proposed an increase to the revenue requirement for KEDNY of $504.3 million and an increase for KEDLI of $314.3 million. The proposed ROE at the time was 10.3%. Assuming a multi-year rate plan. Next slide. Staff's adjustments and recommendations in their testimony indicated that they believed KEDNY was entitled to a $390 million revenue requirement, KEDLI entitled to a $220 million revenue requirement. Staff proposed an ROE of 9.1% for a 1-year rate plan. Next slide. I'm going to turn to the joint proposal's revenue requirement. I'm only showing the levelized. Of course, we have available in the draft order the unlevelized, but this is actually what The rate design will include, for rate years 1 through 3 for KEDNY, the ROE will be 9.35%. Next slide. And KEDNY's levelized is shown also a 9.35 ROE. Next slide. I'd like to talk about the major rate drivers, or the why behind the revenue requirement, and in no particular order, because some of these are applicable to the first year, some are applicable only to the last year. So they include net plant and depreciation expense, operations and maintenance expense, the overall rate of return, property taxes, amortization of regulatory deferrals, and long-term debt, which is assigned really only to KEDLI. Please note that there are partial offsets to these rate drivers and the revenue requirement as a result of higher gas sales forecast, among other matters. Next slide, please. Here are the bill impacts associated with the revenue requirements. And note that in rate year 1, that increase of 19.36% includes the make-whole provisions that were for the September 1st back to April 1st retroactive make-whole provision. So essentially, this first rate year, monthly bill increases for a typical residential customer using 83 decatherms of gas will be $30.18 for KEDNY, $33.35 for KEDLI. Next slide. Here are the capital budget expenditures, and I want to note and clarify that the fiscal year 2024 line item is not a part of the rate plan. It's included for illustrative purposes only. These capital budgets include funding for customer initiatives, information technology advancement, gas safety programs, CLCPA-related investments, including leak and methane detection, aggressive targets to address leak-prone pipe repair backlogs, and funding for other programs and projects. The draft order finds that these capital budgets are reasonable and appropriately include funding for critical programs, as well as projects mandated by federal and state law and regulations. The draft order also indicates that these capital budgets include funding to maintain facilities to ensure system reliability, improve gas safety, and otherwise advance the CLCPA's goals. Notably, the joint proposal excludes funding for some capital projects as a result of the negotiations. Staff determined those projects to be unnecessary to address immediate operational needs, service reliability, and/or public safety. I want to make a note about new customer connections. The draft order approves a reduction of the company's proposed customer connection budget as compared to the company's historical spend. The numbers in these rate plans are lower. This imposes a meaningful incentive for the companies to avoid spending growth in this area because it also caps deferrals. This provision is designed to incentivize the company's pursuit of alternatives to gas service and otherwise reduce greenhouse gas emissions in its service territories. Next slide. The draft order adopts the joint proposal's continuation of gas safety performance metrics. These are particularly important as a result of their really two-pronged purpose, one of which is actually to reduce emissions, and the second of which is to promote safety in their system. These are simply the continuation of safety performance mechanisms adopted in the last rate order. There are negative revenue adjustments associated with the companies not meeting the targets that are identified, and positive revenue adjustments associated with the company's exceedances of those regulatory targets. Next slide. I want to turn to the estimated emission reductions and some CLCPA-related provisions in the draft order and joint proposal. This slide reflects the company's estimates of greenhouse gas emission reductions over the 3-year term of the rate plans. So as you can see, KEDNY is estimating 880,000 1,341 metric tons of CO2 equivalent over the 3-year plan. KEDNY's number is 787,838 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. The next slide, please. This slide includes some of the CLCPA-related provisions and the Commission's findings associated with the company's implementation of these provisions. I want to first look at non-pipe alternatives and expand a little bit on this first bullet point. The draft order approves the joint proposals non-pipe alternative, or NPA, provisions that include expanded criteria and framework for the companies to evaluate possible NPAs in connection with LPP replacements, system reinforcements, main extensions, and new gas service lines. This evaluation is formalized. It must occur before the companies proceed with the construction of traditional gas infrastructure. The draft order approves the requirement for the companies to identify at least 5 segments of LPP in their service territories that could be abandoned in favor of an NPA, and to prioritize to the greatest extent those areas of concentrated LPP miles that can be addressed through an NPA. Notably, the JP also contains provisions designed to replicate successful NPA methodologies in targeting customers who may be willing to participate in moving from gas service to electrification or geothermal systems. It requires the companies to work with the New York City Housing Authority to develop a large-scale NPA in a disadvantaged community. The companies have agreed to enhance promotion of NPAs to their customers through the use of their own internal resources and implementation contractors. Finally, the provision requires the companies to file annual reports to the Commission on their efforts and successes in pursuing NPAs in connection with their gas system. The draft order specifically notes the requirement that the companies file an NPA implementation plan, which will be subject to stakeholder input and public comment. The companies are also required to hire an NPA implementation contractor to oversee the entire NPA process. Notably, the implementation plan will contain some of the details I just discussed and will flesh out in further detail how this criteria to consider NPAs are implemented. In rate year 2, the companies will convene a stakeholder engagement meeting to discuss their progress on NPA implementation. They'll talk about successful and unsuccessful strategies, further modifications to their efforts, and the use of compensation and incentive mechanisms for customers in order to foster NPA implementation. And finally, the companies will report annually to the Commission on their efforts in an NPA opportunities and programmatic success report. The draft order recites and recognizes the challenges associated with NPA implementation because the success of those measures most often relies on customers deciding to move to an alternative form of energy, such as geothermal heat pumps or electrification. This was detailed by DPS staff and the companies at the evidentiary hearing on the joint proposal. Thus, the draft order adopts the joint proposals, these additional emission reduction efforts, including new demand response earnings adjustment mechanism to encourage that program participation. The draft order also approves an increase to the incentive discount offered to demand response customers. Next slide. I want to talk a minute more about, not this slide, but another provision I think is quite important in the draft order, and it's the adoption of the CLCPA and Disadvantaged Communities report and a subsequent disadvantaged communities analysis that the companies will be required to file in their next rate plan. In their testimony, the companies identified infrastructure projects and programs in their capital budgets that are located in disadvantaged communities and had potential to impact those communities. The draft order approves the joint proposal's requirement that the companies submit a CLCPA DAC, Disadvantaged Communities Report, annually, which will detail their activities, including energy efficiency programs, demand response, main replacement, leak repairs, operational data, clean energy jobs, capital investments, efforts to reach low-income customers within a DAC, program implementation and outreach strategies, performance data, and other relevant information. The joint proposal itself provides extensive additional details of the data and information that is required to be included in this report. The joint proposal provides that to the extent the CLCPA DAC report identifies instances of the company's performance failing to meet targets or goals regarding the level of benefits targeted for the communities, the companies are required to submit an action plan to improve performance. The draft order also approves the process for the companies to engage stakeholders by requiring a meeting to be convened within 60 days of the filing of this report. The companies will submit a DAC analysis in their next rate case. This must include greenhouse gas emissions as well as other pollutant emissions found in the disadvantaged community. It also must detail the contribution of capital assets to the existing pollution and the potential burdens on those communities. In addition, proposed project designs and a description of actions necessary to eliminate impacts on the community that may be associated with the project. The DAC analysis is intended to identify the company's infrastructure plans and projects that could pose a disproportionate burden on disadvantaged communities. There are details associated with the level of investment on those capital projects that are also detailed in the joint proposal, and I will not detail here. The draft order before you finds that the CLCPA and DAC report and the DAC analysis required in the next rate cases will provide valuable information to the Commission and to interested stakeholders, and will provide a foundation for the companies to take further actions. I next turn to the renewable natural gas interconnections, which are also considered a part of the CLCPA-related provisions of the joint proposal. The draft order approves the authorization and deferral for future rate recovery of interconnection costs for 4 renewable natural gas projects. 2 are in KEDNY's New York City service territory, and 2 are in KEDLI's Long Island service territory. The joint proposal caps the deferral amount for these projects at $13.19 million for KEDNY and $9.86 million for KEDLI. The joint proposal imposes reporting requirements acknowledged in the draft order. These are required prior to construction of any of the RNG interconnection projects. That report must include an assessment of benefits and costs, the materials to be used, a quantitative accounting of any upstream emissions avoided by the interconnection. Significantly, the draft order contains this minor addition to the scope of this reporting requirement. The companies must analyze whether there are disproportionate impacts associated with any of the RNG projects located in a disadvantaged community. The joint proposal also provides that to the extent the companies purchase renewable natural gas from the interconnected facilities, they must not pay a premium for it. They must purchase the renewable natural gas at a price that is no greater than what is paid for traditional natural gas supplies purchased at the company's city gates. The joint proposal requires the companies to engage with prospective biomethane project developers for the 4 projects to ensure that the sale of the environmental attributes associated with the facility are voluntary and are made only to an entity located in New York. The draft order before you finds that the joint proposal's approach to potential RNG interconnection projects will provide opportunities from which both customers and the state will benefit because of the avoided upstream emissions that are otherwise associated with natural gas production and transportation. The draft order also finds that customers are adequately protected from the uncertainties associated with the 4 RNG interconnection projects proposed through the use of the deferral mechanism, the cost cap, and the reporting requirements about project costs and other details. That report notably is required to be filed within 90 days before commencement of construction of an RNG facility. The draft order finds that the terms of the 3-year rate plans outlined in the joint proposal are consistent with the CLCPA's objectives and will not disproportionately burden disadvantaged communities. In support of this finding, the draft order notes the numerous actions the company will take under the joint proposal during the 3-year rate term. These include non-pipe alternatives, analyzing capital investment impacts to disadvantaged communities, funding economic development and clean energy job training in disadvantaged communities, investing in energy efficiency, prioritizing the repair of leak-prone pipe segments according to the risk of leakage or failure, developing renewable gas resources, continuing the targets in the capacity demand metrics for energy efficiency, demand response, electrification, etc., submitting annual CLCPA and disadvantaged community reports that detail investments and efforts, and the company's continued participation in the utility thermal energy network and implementation of geothermal systems, which is the subject of a separate proceeding on a statewide level. The company's cessation of gas marketing to new or potential customers will continue. They agreed to that in the last rate case. And the Commission also cites the continuing interconnection with the Newtown Creek renewable gas facilities with new reporting requirements to identify the revenues realized from RNG sales and associated environmental attributes, as well as other provisions. The draft order concludes that the adoption of the joint proposal and approval of the company's rate plans will continue to provide safe and adequate service, are consistent with the CLCPA, and do not result in a disproportionate impact on disadvantaged communities. I'm not going to detail the other programs, but just to highlight, these are very strong programs that will continue. One is energy affordability. There are additional dollars being spent for customer initiatives that are weather-related, storm hardening, weatherization, outreach and education, etc. And then the customer service performance indicators are also continued. I want to just make a quick note of a provision in the draft order that deals with the company's payment of organizational dues and its policy activities. With respect to membership dues paid by the companies and any regulated entity, Public Service Law Section 114A prohibits the Commission's approval of a rate plan that includes as operational costs that are payable by ratepayers any membership dues for an organization that engages in lobbying. The draft order provides that the Commission's approval of the joint proposal is premised on the assumption that no organizational membership dues are included in the revenue requirements for any organization that engages in lobbying. The record indicates the potential inclusion of such dues, and the draft order therefore directs the companies within 60 days of the order's issuance to confirm in writing that they have again reviewed the organizations in which they are members and can confirm the exclusion of all dues from the revenue requirement during the 3-year rate terms for any organizations engaged in or otherwise funding lobbying activities. If such dues were incorrectly included, the draft order provides that the company shall defer those amounts for future refund to customers. Now, with respect to the company's other activities that some parties claimed were improper policy activities before governmental agencies and improper postings to the company's website of its clean energy vision, as well as bill inserts communicating similar messages, the draft order finds that these are properly characterized as operational costs for which ratepayers are responsible. In conclusion, the draft order finds that the provisions of the joint proposal meet the statutory requirements applicable to rate plans, as well as complying with the Commission's settlement guidelines and the CLCPA. This concludes my presentation. We are available for questions.
Thank you for the presentation, Judge Leary. I'm thinking back to our time together in Nassau County and the feedback we received at that time. And I know this has been a long road to get to this point, and appreciate you recognizing the travels and multiple public statement hearings. One thing I'd like to do is I want to thank staff for the work in getting this to where it is, but I also want to take a moment to thank our commissioners, particularly our newer commissioners, for the level of engagement and attention to detail in looking through this order and helping it make it what it is before us today. Now, when I think about our charge as a commission, we're here to ensure the safe and continuous operation of the utilities under which our society relies. And to accomplish this mission, continued investments in maintaining the ongoing operation and integrity of the system in accordance with state laws and other regulations, those are essential. And it's the oversight of these investments that is the central task to which this commission is charged. Now, we identify and prioritize these investments through rate cases like this one. And rate cases are a very unique obligation to the commission. And over the 11 plus months or so, staff, stakeholders, and others reviewed thousands upon thousands of pages of documents, negotiating terms, conditions, and outcomes that we have before us today. And the resulting order and its thousands of appendices, though substantial, they conceal what I would describe as a Herculean effort towards its overall development. Now, no negotiated settlement is easy, and this particular case is no different. And with negotiated settlements like this, it's often the case that individual provisions, investments, or actions may not align neatly with the views and positions of everyone involved. One project you mentioned earlier, you didn't mention it specifically, but I'll point it out. A hydrogen project was proposed as part of the initial filing by the utility. And this is something that was actually supported by, I believe, the city of New York, but ultimately opposed by several other parties. This was ultimately rejected, one of many examples. But many other proposals were accepted. Now, we as a commission must ask ourselves if this negotiated settlement before us today is a better outcome than the alternative. And for that, I think the answer is a resounding yes. We are better off. We have to balance interests, those of stakeholders, utilities, and ratepayers. And in achieving that balance, we ensure that the decades of investments that preceded us needed to develop a reliable distribution system can continue to deliver on the results for which the system was designed. And failure in this regard would be a threat to both lives and livelihood. So, given our actions are to balance these interests and assure reliability, I see this order as in the public interest, and I see this as also further aligning with our overall goals and support of the CLCPA. So, judges, thank you for your time today, and I appreciate your work and the effort of staff in bringing us to this point. I'll now move to Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, let me start also to you, Judge Leary, Judge Costello, Judge Leakakes, and the entire staff. These types of orders, cases to consider are not easy. But you continue to show the level of professionalism and due diligence in following the statute and following guidelines to bring an order to us for consideration, and certainly this example is no different. So I thank you really for the tremendous work that you have done to this point. I just want to sort of echo what the chair has said. I don't have any questions, but I do want to echo what the chair has said in a slightly different way, and in terms of what our basic, and by us I mean the commission, what our basic charge today is, and why we are here, and what we are asked to do. And to do that, I'll return, Judge Leary, to some of your opening comments, and I'll do it in a little bit of a different way. I'll actually take it from the discussion section of the order itself, because I think this is really the place from which we begin and from which each of us come to a conclusion. So I'll just share for the record. Again, this is item number 4, discussion in the draft order. It says as follows: in establishing utility rates, the Commission may consider any factor and assign whatever weight it deems appropriate. How do we do that? Why do we do that? In 1986, the result of a court case in the matter of Abrams versus the Public Service Commission. 1986, that's a long time ago. The order goes on to say, we are specifically called upon to regulate electric and gas rates to ensure that all charges are just and reasonable, and that they produce sufficient revenue for the utility to provide safe and adequate service. Where does that come from? Also, quite a while ago, and Judge Lee Case, you referred to this, I believe, in our session last month, 1992, the settlement guidelines that were adopted by the Commission at that time and have been in effect ever since. The order goes on to say we are also required to make specific findings under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that our determination here is consistent with the state's emission reduction objectives and will not disproportionately burden disadvantaged communities. I think, if my memory is correct, and Mr. Rosenthal, Judge Rosenthal, Mr. Rosenthal will correct me if I'm not, 3 years ago, almost to the day, when then Commissioner Christian, Commissioner Majori, and I were still relatively new commissioners at the time. It was the previous version of this case, the Kedney-Kedley order, where for the very first time we adopted the CLCPA review as part of that rate case and every rate case that has come since, and we continue to do that here on this anniversary of that inclusion. So in cases such as these, where the terms of a joint proposal have been submitted for Commission consideration, we must determine if such terms, viewed as a whole, produce a result that is in the public interest. In doing so, we follow our settlement guidelines, which I referred to earlier from 1992, and consider whether the terms of the JP appropriately balance protection of consumers, fairness to investors, and the long-term viability of the utility. So the previous point, we must determine if such terms, when viewed as a whole, produce a result that is in the public interest. There's an awful lot in here. And Judge Leary, I give you great credit for summarizing an awful lot of material into a relatively short period of time, because we could certainly spend all day talking about various provisions here. But we as commissioners, whether we like a provision, dislike a provision, support a provision, oppose a provision, we are charged to look at the order on the whole and determine, as we look at it on its whole, as to whether we find it in the public interest. Upon going through that exercise myself, I concur and agree with Chair Christian, and I also find the order in the public interest and will be supporting it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Majori?
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Leary, and everybody that worked on this. Thank you for the presentation and the important work that you did in bringing this case to us today. I have a few questions, and then I'm going to explain my vote if the answers to the questions are as I anticipate. You had a slide that showed some of the rate drivers of this case. Can you characterize what you would say are the major rate drivers of this case?
So there's so much information associated with the separate things that are listed on that slide.
Yeah.
Let me just give you an example. Energy efficiency is in the O&M budget. It's a very large portion of the O&M budget. So when you see O&M, you think, oh, that includes energy efficiency, and it also includes many other kinds of things. So for KEDNY, income taxes, oh, I'm sorry. Why don't you do this? Judge Costello gave me something to read. He's going to take it over.
Yeah, I'll go through
Thank you.
basically
Thank
the different things. So net plant investments, it was $120 million for KEDNY as part of the $440 million increase in rate year one. Total operations and maintenance costs, $90 million. The increase in the rate of return is $68 million. Property taxes is a $57 million increase, and depreciation expense is $54 million. For KEDLI, with respect to rate year one, property taxes account for $75 million of the increase, plant investments $72 million, total operations and maintenance costs $60 million. The increase in the rate of return is $40 million and $20 million for depreciation expense.
Okay, thank you. Let me tell you why I'm asking that. If you look at the major drivers of the case that you just went over, I think it would be disingenuous to claim that CLCPA compliance is the reason, or perhaps even the major reason, for rates going up in this particular case. And further, I understand that it's difficult to disentangle the costs of initiatives that promote energy efficiency or otherwise would help the state meet its climate goals that are part of this case specifically because of the CLCPA or because of reasons that exist outside the CLCPA itself. Most of the major drivers that you just went over are more prosaic than that. That's not a question. It's just, explaining why I'm asking the question. The other issue related to this, tangentially, that I wanted to ask, you had a slide up that acknowledged the company's assertions of a 3-year emission reduction estimate for both of them. And in mentioning this and in acknowledging this in the order, are we endorsing those estimates, or are we acknowledging that that's what the company is putting forth?
I think we are only acknowledging, I read this over again in light of a couple of comments we received before today, and I think we are acknowledging. I want to just make sure, let's go to 30,000 feet. When you're talking about measuring emissions, it is extremely difficult, and we are very early in the process of attempting to do that as a state. It's not just the utilities, it's people who are emitting pollutants have to do this now under the CLCPA, and the agencies that approve, they're doing that, like the Department of Environmental Conservation, for example, they have to make this same finding. So the measurement, I think, is going to continue to evolve. This morning I looked at the CLCPA panel that the company presented, and it identified in really summary terms what it had used to estimate those emissions. And it had used something that DEC has advanced as a factor, so to speak. Where it was not necessarily applicable, they turned to an EPA document. So the record here indicates that the companies undertook, in good faith, an effort to measure in accordance with what the ongoing state and federal regulatory agencies are promoting and I think that could evolve, but that's not something that is in play right now, that we are where we are in terms of measuring. So I don't think we're endorsing those numbers. I think that they're important numbers for us to consider and look closely in this case, as we did, the staff did in this case, and in the next rate cases, what's behind those numbers? Yeah. Are they, sound in terms of the methodology used to estimate them? Do they include everything that should be included? So just by way of example, the company in rebuttal had to come back and talk more about, okay, you told us what the reductions are, now tell us what projects you have that are going to increase emissions. So we need to sort of look at a net number here. And that resulted in the companies downward estimation of their emission reductions because they had then included additional. So there is a generic proceeding in the state regarding the CLCPA. I have faith that that proceeding will advance an evolution of these issues on how to measure emissions so that when we look at those numbers that I had to put on the slide, because I wanted them to really be sort of front and center, not that we endorse them, but this is what the companies think. Then they followed a methodology that is sound, it appears. So I think the CLCPA proceeding, Commissioner Marjorie, will further develop how this works, how you measure, and when you measure, what you measure, and all of those kinds of things. I hope that answers your question. Anybody else, please step in.
I just want to provide some clarification with respect to those numbers. Those numbers were provided by the company in rebuttal, the numbers on the slide, in rebuttal testimony. They're not with respect to what is provided in the joint proposal. We would anticipate that they would be similar, but we don't have the information on GHG emissions specifically as under the joint proposal. So I just wanted to clarify that.
And
Okay,
parenthetically, Commissioner, I just want to add that if the companies say this rate plan, this time around, this is information that is of value in the next rate plans. What did you really do? That's the question that I think is an important one to keep in the back of our minds when the companies come in. And it may be much more than that number, it may be much less, but it's certainly important information to be considered in the next rate plans. And I think that's going to be true for all the utilities in New York.
I very much appreciate that explanation and the context, and also that we do make note of those numbers in the order and in your presentation. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask an unrelated question, and then I'm going to explain my vote. The unrelated question is this. So annual economic development funding will be set at about 1.4 million for KEDNY and about 1.2 million for KEDLI, which will be funded through the amortization of prior economic development deferral credits, resulting in a $0 net revenue requirement for each company. Does the $0 net revenue requirement mean that this approximately $2.5 million worth of programs have no impact on a ratepayer's bill for the pendency of this rate case?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to explain my vote. I'm not asking a question here. I apologize if I'm going to be somewhat lengthy here. I am going to vote yes on this order. As you may have heard before in other rate cases, I don't want to vote yes. I don't want to raise anyone's rates. However, as I search the record, I don't see anything to justify a no vote. I'm in agreement with the chair that if we voted this order down, the likely consequences, the alternative, would be worse for ratepayers. And I often feel that the commission is faced often with the choice between unpalatable options, and this is the case here. I would have liked to have uncovered some dramatic accounting error or some large discretionary cost driver that could be zeroed out, or a violation of law buried deep within the JP, giving me an excuse to vote no and a path to make it better. But I can't find any of those things. I asked the question about economic development programs, and I want to be clear that I am skeptical of a foundation based in the public service law justifying our approval of cost recovery for economic development programs in general. I would like to take a closer look at how we evaluate such programs in the future. However, as we discussed in the question or the answer that you just gave, this is not an issue in this rate case. On the CLCPA, first, I think we have established that the CLCPA is not the major reason for the rate increase. Further, there's a distinction, as I mentioned, between cost recovery for programs that are consistent with the CLCPA versus initiatives that would not exist but for the CLCPA, and I understand that this is difficult to disentangle. In any event, these costs are significantly smaller than the largest rate drivers in this particular case. The CLCPA has many parts, and compliance with one part does not necessarily equate with compliance with all parts. To that end, I'd like to specifically address Section 7.2. I read Section 7.2 as applying to all state entities, including the PSC, that make any decision or take any action that interferes with the state's attainment of greenhouse gas emission limits. In such cases, the state entity in question must justify the action and then identify either an alternative or mitigation efforts. I believe that this order satisfies that requirement, but I'd like to take a little closer look as to how. Unlike the electric sector, for which the CLCPA has established very prescriptive emissions and renewable energy targets, the CLCPA law is silent on gas utilities. The Commission continues to be in a transitional period while the economy-wide emissions regulations are developed by the DEC, and while efforts to harmonize the Public Service Law and the CLCPA, which are attention and points, continue to be discussed in the legislature. Many questions about the future of gas utilities remain, and in the meantime, we have, as has been mentioned, public service law obligations to ensure safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. Gas utilities continue to have a legal obligation to serve customers. And we have an obligation to review gas rate cases to determine if they are consistent with the CLCPA. We cannot change the law. That is power reserved for the legislature. There are a number of provisions in the JP approved and strengthened in the draft order that advance the CLCPA and that mitigate the greenhouse gas emission impacts associated with the company's operations. You reviewed those provisions at length. I had a very slightly different list, but since you spent quite a bit of time in your presentation going over many of those provisions, I'm not going to repeat what you said. But I do believe that these provisions constitute compliance with both the Public Service Law and the CLCPA. So we have I'm sorry. I'm skipping over what you already said, so I'm not going to say that. So I would like to point out that many of the provisions that you highlighted are among the most innovative gas utility initiatives in the entire country and meaningfully advance the state forward in achieving its CLCPA targets. So we have a justification for this order based in the PSL, which is the law that creates this commission, and we've identified mitigation to the greenhouse gas impact of the operations of the two utilities, which satisfies Section 7.2 of the CLCPA. So I think we're in compliance with the law. I can't find justification for a no vote, so I'm going to cast a yes vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bright?
Thank you, Chair. I have some similar, I will be sort of echoing some of the similar maybe questions and getting some additional information, but similar questions of Commissioner Valesky and Commissioner Majori. So first, I sort of wanted to talk about, and first, thank you for all of your hard work. I mean, I should start there. I mean, this was a huge record, and pulling all of this together is quite a task. But I wanted to start with just talking about some of the parameters around settlements. So just for some clarity, we sort of deem a settlement is in the public interest, as we sort of went over, because it is continuing to provide safe, reliable service at just and reasonable rates while preserving operational financial stability of the utility and the systems that we're actually relying upon. That the settlement falls within the range of potentially litigated outcomes or otherwise provides benefits ratepayers would not have received through litigation and is consistent with environmental, social, and economic policies of the Commission and the state. But there's also the settlement framework, which we touched on, but I just wanted to see if you could give that a little more overarching background, and just in the order, it's very specific. It says that we do not disturb the interrelated compromises negotiated by the parties in the absence of a demonstration that a provision of the agreement is inconsistent with sound policy. So I just wanted to just get a sort of plain speaking definition on sort of what that settlement framework is that we're working within from you.
I want to ask Judge Lee Kicks to talk about the Consolidated Edison case and the discussion there about the framework, but I will say, having negotiated a lot during my life in all realms, not just legal, negotiations, which we have no idea about, it is confidential, it's a process that we cannot have any knowledge of. But behind the curtain of negotiations is the horse trading. And I think that's something that is very hard to understand without knowing the facts of what did you get for giving up that. And that's what happens in negotiations, in every joint proposal, I suspect. So it's hard to decide, for, sort of post-game, why did this happen? It's not something we have enough information about. But I think the chair and Commissioner Valesky were really succinct in saying this is viewed as a whole. This is viewed as, we cannot exactly know what happened behind the curtain, but as a whole, without picking out each individual term that we may not love, there's not much more to be done except view it as a whole, as a resolution. And one thing I didn't mention, which goes well beyond or well before the settlement guidelines from 1992, was the Commission's policy to encourage settlement, to have people meet face-to-face, arm's length, and neither of them will be entirely happy and neither of them will be entirely unhappy. So that promotion of settlement is really important to the Commission's work historically and even today. So do you mind talking about Con Ed?
Good morning, Commissioners. I think what Judge Leary said is really important. Basically, when parties affix their signatures to the joint proposal, they're doing that in reliance of the negotiation process that took place. And while we may look at it from the outside and think, hey, we might have done something different in this term or that term, these parties are signing the agreement having given up certain things. And, because of that, the Commission has a long history of respecting the joint proposals that are submitted and, again, looking at it as the entire document, not on an individual element basis. The point that Judge Leary was making about the 2019 Con Edison rate case, which resulted in a January 2020 order, the Commission spoke there to parties that were attacking the joint proposal on an individual term basis and saying that the order basically says that to the extent that parties want to challenge the joint proposal because of a single term in that joint proposal, they need to point out that that joint proposal is so outside the realm of what's allowed either by policy or by law as to infect the entire joint proposal. To the extent that it's something less than that, if there's a reasonable minor modification that can be made, the Commission will consider it, but it does so knowing that it is invading the territory of the negotiations, and so it's very careful when it does that.
Thank you. So, and the settlement process, it seems like it could be sort of undermined if we regularly modified JPs without getting the parties to agree to that.
Right. The way we look at it from the Office of Hearings is to the extent that we start second-guessing the terms and making modifications like that, it gives less certainty to the parties when they affix their signatures, and to the extent that parties don't have any faith that what they're agreeing to is going to survive Commission review, they'll be less likely to engage in settlement discussions and to settle on terms because they don't know ultimately if that's what if the JP that they submit is ultimately what they'll be faced with.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much. So my next question is sort of on those big bucket categories that Commissioner Majori sort of mentioned, sort of just wanting to look at rate year one. You did define, I feel like already, those big buckets. So thank you for that, Judge Costello. The property and income taxes are quite sizable here. And I'm just wondering, like, is there a percentage that we have for the unlevelized, like, of what is the property taxes?
Yeah,
and income
the income taxes are actually not a major factor. It's the property
taxes.
So the property taxes in rate year one, for KEDNY, it's a 13% of the revenue requirement increase. And for KEDLI, it's 30% of the increase.
Wow, okay. Okay, thank you. So I just want to switch topics a little bit after that, just to the RNG piece in this. So both staff and the company pointed to the Climate Action Council scoping plan, looking at RNG's role in the clean energy transition, which the scoping plan does mention that. I wanted to pull some of the specific language out of the scoping plan, so I'm just going to read that here on page 350 of the scoping plan in the gas transition chapter. I'm going to paraphrase, though. So while there may be, it says, a strategic role for the system to transport RNG, the potential in-state availability and resource size of RNG is currently small as compared with current levels of fossil gas use. It goes on to say the council, which is the Climate Action Council, notes that additional analysis, and this is the part I really want to get into, that additional analysis is needed to determine the feasibility and the climate impact, and it's talking about both RNG and green hydrogen production in this instance. The analysis, it says, should include an evaluation of the full life cycle greenhouse gas and co-pollutant emission impacts, health impacts, impacts on energy affordability, and safety and reliability considerations for the use of RNG and green hydrogen prior to investments in alternative fuels for use in the gas system planning as described in the gas system transition plan framework, which is the chapter that it's that this information is in. So my question is really about this evaluation of greenhouse gas emissions and emissions reductions and how we look at the true costs of emissions and the true benefits of those reductions. We sort of talked, Commissioner Majori brought this up on the estimates that the company provided. I'm just trying to get a sense of like where we're going, having a standard way of looking at measuring emission reductions, emissions, and then also the benefits. I'm just trying to get a sense of where we're at with that.
So I mentioned before the evolving nature of the emissions measurement science, and I think it will get there. I really do. But a couple things in the record struck me. The company included an EPA document that thoroughly reviews the potential behind renewable natural gas, and frankly was very high on developing that source. It will depend on a lot of factors, however, including the feedstock. What are you making your renewable gas from? It will depend in part on, are you going to ship it to another state, or are you going to use it in the community in which it's being generated? And I agree, and I think no one here or on the company side would disagree that you need to really look at what are the emissions potentials of that option. What are you saving upstream? So the companies here have evaluated that and have estimated what those upstream emissions reductions will be, and they are upstream, which under the CLCPA we are required to analyze. So when I think we saw that EPA document and we looked at the Climate Action Council scoping plan, which leaves the door very much open about renewable natural gas, there's no second guessing those factors in the record, and I am the queen of second guessing. But in essence, I think that this is a transition period in which we continue to explore, and that's why the reporting requirements on the RNG interconnection facilities are so important. Okay, what are you going to do? What's it going to cost? What are the benefits? And as the draft order notes, the customers, the ratepayers are protected by that reporting, by the cap, the deferral cap. Remember, these dollars are not in this rate plan. They are approved to be deferred so that the companies can explore those interconnections. And as we sit here, we don't know whether those 4 facilities will ever become real. Maybe they will not be feasible. That's to be seen. But in a transition period, as we are under the CLCPA, it's incumbent upon us to leave every door open that we possibly can to reduce emissions.
Thanks so much, Judge Leary. And just on those reporting requirements, I think it is worth just going over them one more time. I mean, there's staff recommended strict reporting requirements on the RNG projects, and the JP imposes some reporting requirements on the proposed biomethane interconnections, and then also on the Newtown Creek RNG project, if I'm not mistaken. So I just wanted to go over those if possible.
Yeah, let me go to Newtown Creek first, because I didn't cover this. This was a facility that was approved under the last rate plan. There are dollars in this rate plan for that facility, but the testimony at our day-long evidentiary hearing was very positive in favor of this facility. And I was impressed with their expert, as I think it was Judge Costello, in responding to very pointed questions about, okay, what's the 30,000 foot? Is it better now than it used to be for the neighborhood? And he said, quote, "There's no comparison. It's better." So it convinced us, and of course he was under oath, but here are the reporting requirements. The draft order, these are the dollars approved, $15.7 million in capital expenditures. The deferrals are capped at $2.16 million, rate years 2 and 3. In the reporting, KEDNY must identify the total revenues realized from the sale of RNG and the associated environmental attributes. It must also identify the quantity of biomethane produced, the number of days and hours the project is online and offline, the number and value of environmental attributes sold each month, the estimated emission reductions to KEDNY's system, and the nature of complaints received in the community regarding the project. There is a reconciliation mechanism that I also want to mention, because there are revenue forecasts associated with Newtown Creek, and there is a formula in place that calls for, it's frankly a bit complicated, it calls for actual revenues to be reconciled with those that are forecasted. And if revenues exceed the expected forecast over the 3-year rate term, any excess amounts are refunded to customers through a delivery rate adjustment mechanism. After rate year 3, annual revenues in excess of $5.93 million will be refunded to customers. But if actual revenues do not exceed the forecast, KEDNY can defer for future recovery 50% of the difference between the forecasted amounts and $1.6 million. So you can see how complicated this is, but it's all designed to protect the ratepayers from having to spend their dollars on this facility. This requires a demonstration of real benefit, dollar-wise as well as emission-wise. Turning to the 4 RNG facilities, I might have to look at the, do you have that? Okay, for the biomethane interconnection projects, the reporting required that's to be done 90 days before commencement of construction has to contain a cost estimate for the interconnection project, which I assume will be updated because there are cost estimates in the record now. So you get an idea of what the projects right now are anticipated to cost. The report also must include a summary of the benefits to the reliability of the gas system in the vicinity of the interconnection project and in the company's service territory in general. A detailed description will also be included of the source materials that will be used at the interconnection facility to produce biomethane, that is the feedstock, whether it's from a wastewater treatment plant or food waste, or I think there are farms that can produce RNG and so forth, landfills. A detailed accounting will also be included of the upstream greenhouse gas emissions avoided by the RNG interconnection that the companies will realize as a result of the interconnections. There is additional, as I think I mentioned in my presentation, disadvantaged communities reporting. So there's an additional modification that was made to the joint proposal to protect those communities. My understanding is there's at least one of the four proposed RNG interconnections that is actually located, the company knows all about it, in a disadvantaged community. There'll be additional reporting associated with emissions and so forth and impacts on that community. I hope that answers your question.
Very much. Thank you. So lastly, I just want to move over to the non-pipeline alternatives. So you did give a very good summary of sort of some of the steps that are going to be taken. And the NPAs are not funded by this rate plan, but sort of the expanded process, right, is sort of funded by this rate plan. So I just wanted to there were, when we sort of talked earlier, there's 8 distinct improvements that you guys sort of noted. So I'd like to just if you could go over those improvements, that would be great. Maybe more.
I might need some help here, but
or a few improvements.
The thing that impressed me the most, this is just me talking, is that there's an implementation plan that really will capture some of the intent behind the joint proposals provisions, and that will drive going forward how this program advances. I also want to refer you to some testimony during the evidentiary hearing in which I personally explored, what's with MPAs and, tell me about this. And the testimony by both the companies and staff was very compelling about the challenges associated with this, particularly for a gas-only company, and what the options are and so forth. So that, coupled with the improvements to their process and the intention that the companies express to really make this work, is pretty important to the draft order. This is my view, and I think it's reflected in the draft order. Pairing the NPAs with very specific infrastructure projects is also important. So service line replacements, LPP, main work, all of those things NPAs are going to be considered first before you invest in the infrastructure. What am I missing?
Well, I believe you said most of them, but it's, I'll just list it out because I have something written down about it. It's prioritize leak-prone pipe, non-pipe alternative projects that are located within disadvantaged communities. They're going to work with New York City Housing Authority to develop a large-scale program. They will, and that's implement an updated and improved process for the companies to follow to ensure that they are trying to develop leak-prone pipe NPA projects with the greatest chance of success. There's a listing in the joint proposal of what that entails. I can read it to you if you want. They also have to perform an analysis of any main extension request that's greater than 100 feet, as opposed to its current requirement, which applies to new mains greater than 500 feet. And then they also have to seek opportunities to provide incentives to have customers switch away from gas equipment instead of installing new service lines. And they have to provide information about otherwise replacing or relocating existing service lines.
So also the check on this is that there are annual reports to the commission. You know, what have you done? What are your efforts? Have you had successes? Have you had failures? Another notable point is that there's going to be stakeholder engagement in this process on the implementation plan. There are 5 segments of LPP that have to be identified in their service territories that could be abandoned in favor of an MPA. This is going to take a lot of work. They're required to hire a contractor that's just going to oversee the non-pipe alternative process. So these are some of the things that make this a lot different than what they did in their last rate plan, and really foster potential success for these efforts.
Yeah, thank you. So those are my questions. I mean, the gas utilities by law, still have an obligation to serve their customers. And, by approving this joint proposal, we ensure that Brooklyn Union Gas customers and Keyspan Gas customers will have certainty over the next 3 years on the prices they will be paying. So I will be voting in favor of this item. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sheehan?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. My mic is working. Thank you. So, being later on the dais just means that a lot of people say a lot of things before you. So I'm going to try to winnow in on things that necessarily haven't been said while also conveying my position. So first, I just want to thank Judge Leary, Judge Costello, Judge Lee Cakes, Allison Manns, and Marianne Sarantino for all of your hard work, as well as all of the staff that worked on this. I know it's been a grind. So I also want to thank the parties, those who signed on to the joint proposal and those who didn't. I want to make sure that even the ones who didn't sign on, I want you to know that I personally read the evidence you submitted, your statements. As you've heard from my colleagues, we do have to make our decisions based on the law and based on the evidence in front of us. So, but just be aware that those things are things we consider and we do review. In general, I agree that the joint proposal, on the whole, ensures continued safe and reliable service as required by the Public Service Law and complies with the CLCPA. I'm impressed that it includes the non-pipe alternative improvements, energy efficiency, demand response, the utility thermal energy network investments in economic development and workforce development in disadvantaged communities, as well as robust reporting requirements and the DAC analysis. These are, I think, really important components of this JP for me personally. I know Commissioner Majori and Commissioner Bright both asked questions about certain things that I cared about as far as the drivers. As commissioners, we receive this case and you see the numbers, and the numbers are big, right? So my first reaction was to dig into the numbers, and I wasn't there. I had to review the evidence. So, but I'm looking at the comments from folks who are saying, oh, this is too much, we need to be going the other direction. But on the whole, I think that the investments from my judgment and from what was presented in evidence are necessary to provide that safe, reliable service and to comply with the CLCPA. But one thing I wanted to kind of zero in on a little bit, because the increases on their face appear large, you talked a little bit about property taxes, but I also wanted to get at the specifics of maintaining a safe system and what we determined as far as, of the percentage increases, what portion of that is really directly related to mandated costs for safe service.
Well, we actually, our view is that everything that's been approved is really necessary for either necessary business costs, or to provide safe and reliable service. So that's including the capital projects as well as the O&M costs involved.
Right.
With respect to discretionary, so-called discretionary spending, the company stripped away through the process of negotiation a number of things which it determined did not need to happen during this period of time. So our view is that basically all of the costs are either required by law or necessary to provide safe and reliable service.
Thank you. Okay. So then my other question, as my colleagues, I took a lot of interest as well in the RNG projects and the biomethane project. So Judge Lee Cakes, you described the joint proposal context. One thing that's important, I think, for me, is just understanding that while this JP may include provisions that we're not 100% embracing or loving, that it doesn't set a precedent for us. That it recognizes that there's a balancing act that happens in the settlement negotiations, but that by approving it in the order, we aren't by that action establishing a precedent for future rate cases.
Right. So the precedent that's set when the Commission adopts a joint proposal is that it adheres to the Commission's settlement guidelines of 1992, and it continues to affirm the way it reviews the joint proposal. As for the terms themselves, because they are negotiated among the parties who are involved and based on the testimony that's been supplied previously in the process, those terms, the terms of the joint proposal, are not precedential themselves. They can be used by other parties as reference when they negotiate things in future cases, but they don't carry as much weight, if any weight, into each commission's successive review of a joint proposal.
Okay, thank you for that. One thing that I did want to just reference is that I am supportive of the biomethane projects that are included in the JP, in the context of the JP, and recognizing that they are pilots. This is a new arena for the Commission, for the companies. And I do think that we're going to learn from these projects. The reporting is going to be really essential. We expect to realize greenhouse gas emissions benefits. Something that was important for me was the environmental attributes remaining in New York. What I want to be clear about is, going forward, I just want us to be looking at this in a holistic way, and as a department, as a commission, and recognizing that there are different approaches happening across the state when we're looking at RNG and biomethane projects and how those are being incorporated by different utilities. So my recommendation just going forward on that topic is that we look at creating a more comprehensive, holistic approach, learning from these projects, and looking at things like cost causation, taking a page from what we're doing on the electric grid side, and ensuring that the environmental attributes remain in the state. So that was just something that I wanted to get on the table for the future.
And I think that's an excellent observation you made. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Commissioner Sheehan, can I just
Of course.
add that there are two perfect forums to implement your suggestion that come to mind, and the parties in these cases recognize them and repeatedly referred to them, which are the gas planning proceeding, the statewide gas planning proceeding, and the statewide CLCPA proceeding. So I think this is definitely on the radar screen for us as an agency, as well as all the parties here that were involved in these proceedings.
Thanks for that follow-up, Judge. Actually, that was in my notes, but I didn't say them, so that's great. You just took that was exactly what I was going to say about the other proceedings, so terrific. So that's really all I really wanted to cover, but as my colleagues have articulated, it's my sense that this joint proposal and the order I will be supporting on the basis that it is in the public interest and that it complies with the Public Service Law and the CLCPA. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Villova.
All right, thank you. First, I want to echo my fellow commissioners in thanking staff and the ALJs for their hard work on this case, as well as all the interveners who participated in the docket. I have some questions, sticking with the theme of the biomethane interconnections. Having reviewed the record, I noted that some parties raised concerns that these projects, which the draft order notes are being done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, could cause disproportionate impacts in disadvantaged communities. Judge Leary, as you noted, one of the projects would be located in a disadvantaged community. I am pleased that the draft order makes a minor modification to the joint proposal's biomethane reporting requirements to have the companies also conduct an analysis of potential disproportionate impacts to disadvantaged communities. The order then goes on to explain that the Commission will assess the information provided in these reports. My question is, what is the purpose of the Commission's review of the reports?
I'll take that. First, I want to just make a comment about the observation that it was a minor modification, because I mentioned with Commissioner Bright that we tend not to make modifications to joint proposals. In this case, we departed from that because there was already a unique process that was involved in the review of these biomethane interconnection projects by requiring the company to supply additional information. And so we felt that just supplementing that reporting requirement that the company already agreed to do with a disadvantaged community analysis was appropriate in this instant. As to your question about the purpose of the reporting, the companies claim that the projects will displace gas supply from the interstate pipeline system and have a resulting decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. So the primary purpose for the reporting from our perspective is to evaluate the emissions analysis conducted by the company, evaluate the methodology that they use, and generally better understand the final projects before they actually commence construction of the interconnection.
Okay, thank you. The order doesn't say what happens after Commission review. If we review and conclude that the projects don't reduce emissions as intended or have some other concern or impact, what is our recourse?
So even though the Commission makes a finding of adopting a joint proposal, that doesn't end its oversight authority. So the Commission retains its oversight authority to review the reasonableness of the projects, and it can ultimately decide whether cost recovery should be disallowed, whether during the term of the rate plan or in the next rate case.
Okay. So to understand or to confirm my understanding, if in this review the Commission sees a problem with the analysis or the data provided, we could disallow cost recovery for those 4 interconnections.
That is correct.
Okay. And in conducting that review, do we have the ability, would we be able to get insights from other parties and stakeholders in conducting that review?
Right. So if it was deemed necessary through senior staff and consultation with the chair and the commissioners that it was desirable to have additional comment from outside parties, yes, we can absolutely request that.
Okay, so again, to confirm my understanding, we could solicit stakeholder feedback, a notice and comment period on the data provided.
We could do that.
Thank you. Okay, those were my questions. I'd like to begin by saying I appreciate that the order explicitly recognizes in the introduction that the Commission is required to make specific findings under the CLCPA, and that our determination of this case must be consistent with the state's emissions reduction objectives, and that it will not disproportionately burden disadvantaged communities. It's really helpful for me to get this clarification in the Commission's role in reviewing the biomethane interconnection projects, that if the data shows any potential concerns, the Commission can disallow cost recovery for these projects. I think it's important, as Commissioner Sheehan has noted, that as we assess new technologies, we do so with the information and data necessary to evaluate them. And I look forward to reviewing those reports when they are submitted. To be honest, without this clarification, I would have found it difficult to vote to approve the joint proposal, given the potential costs of the interconnections and the fact that one of them is known to potentially be located in a disadvantaged community. With this clarification, I concur. Thank you.
And my mic is not on. Sorry. So thank you, everyone. Excuse me, Ms. Frasick, I believe this is inappropriate.
Can we please pause the record?
Excuse me, I appreciate your interest. Your comments have been made as part of the proceeding. You are disrupting our ability to conduct our business.
We're disrupting an undemocratic process. This is not a democratic process. This is a situation which is going to continue gas use until 2080, and we're going to fry by then.
And we can't just talk about the interconnect. We can't just talk about RNG, which is actually also killing the community.
We're going to declare a recess until this can be managed. Thank you, everyone.
Now you're leaving the public alone.
Zero one. My vote is in favor of the recommendations to adopt the terms of the joint proposal as discussed. Commissioner Valesky, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori,
Yes.
Commissioner Bright,
Yes.
Commissioner Sheehan,
Yes.
Commissioner Villova.
Concur.
The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you, everyone. We'll now move to our second item for discussion, after which, just for everyone's information, we'll be taking a brief 10-minute break. The second item for discussion today is item 401, case 23-W-0235. This case relates to Liberty Utilities, New York Water, and their rates. It'll be presented today by Tara Kersey, Dakin Lee Cakes, Jeff Hogan, and Mike Reeder are all available for questions should any arise. Judge Kersey, please begin. And I believe this is your first time before the commission. All right, welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Christian and Commissioners. My name is Tara Kersey. I was assigned to preside over this proceeding with Chief Administrative Law Judge Lee Cakes. Before you is a draft order that would establish a 3-year rate plan for Liberty Utilities New York Water Corp. For April 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2027. The rate plan is consistent with a joint proposal executed by Liberty and DPS staff. 2 other parties participated in this proceeding, the Public Utility Law Project of New York, Inc., PULP, and LI Clean Air, Water and Soil Limited, CAUSE. Although PULP did not sign the JP, it submitted a statement in neutrality, noting its support for low-income customer assistance programs, but expressing concerns regarding bill impacts. CAUSE opposes the JP, citing affordability concerns and the rate plan's potential impact on municipalization efforts. Having reviewed the evidence in this case, we conclude that the JP is in the public interest and recommend adoption of it. This proceeding is most clearly viewed within the context of 2 previous commission orders. The first approving a rate plan for New York American Water Company, Inc., Liberty's predecessor, and the second that allowed Liberty's acquisition of New York American Water. The New York American Water rate plan was adopted in a May 2017 order, and the rate plan ended on March 31st, 2021. In December 2021, the Commission approved Liberty's acquisition of New York American Water. Liberty operates 21 separate water systems and 1 wastewater system spread over 8 counties. Liberty acts only as operator for 4 of those systems, both owning and operating the other 17 systems. Liberty's systems are divided into 2 separately billed service areas, referred to as Service Area 1, SA1, and Service Area 2, SA2. SA2 consists of Merrick and Seacliff on Long Island. The rest of the water systems make up SA1. Notably, during the merger proceedings, staff conducted a study regarding the feasibility of municipalizing the company's systems. Staff's report found that municipalization was feasible and could produce customer benefits. After the study was released, legislation was passed that created 2 water authorities in Nassau County to pursue municipalization. While negotiations have been underway between the authorities and the company, municipalization is not a part of this rate case. Criticism of the joint proposal relevant to municipalization has been that a rate increase is likely to frustrate the municipalization negotiations by increasing the value of utility assets. However, no actual evidence was presented showing that a rate increase will impact municipalization negotiations. Moreover, the Commission is obligated under the Public Service Law to hold a hearing on any utility request for a major rate increase. Because of a Commission stay-out requirement in the 2021 acquisition order, when Liberty filed this case in May 2023, it had not requested a rate increase in 7 years. Liberty requested a 1-year increase of approximately $39.745 million on a consolidated basis across SA1 and SA2, based on a 10% return on equity and a common equity ratio of 50%. DPS staff testimony indicated that it did not support consolidating the 2 service areas and recommended a $14.1 million revenue increase in SA1 and a $1.7 million decrease in SA2 for a one-year rate plan. Staff proposed an 8.9% return on equity and a common equity ratio of 44%. Rate case settlement negotiations began in October of 2023 and ended with the joint proposals filing on May 31st, 2024. As noted during Judge Leary's presentation, when reviewing a settlement in a rate case, the Commission must ensure that its terms enable the utility to provide safe, adequate, and reliable service at just and reasonable rates. Judge Leakeakes and I have concluded that the joint proposal satisfies the Commission's settlement criteria and recommend its adoption. The JP proposes a 3-year rate plan that covers April 1st, 2024 through March 31st, 2027. It reduces Liberty's initial $39.745 million request to a combined SA1 and SA2 rate year 1 increase of $17.24 million. The JP's SA1 levelized revenue increases are $13,704,197 in each of the rate years. The SA2 increases, including an incremental property tax surcharge applicable only in Seacliff, are $3.5 million in rate year 1 and $1.8 million in rate years 2 and 3. The incremental property tax surcharge charges Seacliff customers for the incremental per customer property tax burden in excess of the per customer property tax responsibility of Merrick. The recommended rate plan is based on a 9.1 return on equity and a 48% common equity ratio. It includes an earnings sharings mechanism that is triggered if the company's actual return exceeds 9.75 in any rate year. The major drivers of rate increases are net plant, O&M expenses, and property taxes. The JP's long-term capital provisions ensure that the company can continue providing safe and adequate water service, thus serving the public interest. The JP's construction projects are intended to continue the replacement of Liberty's distribution mains annually, address contamination of fresh drinking water supplies, including from 1,4-dioxane at the Siemens Neck Water Treatment Plant, continue water treatment upgrades, complete the installation of the Advanced Metering Infrastructure, or AMI, respond as necessary to water main breaks with repair and replacement actions, and fund a number of upgrades to Liberty's water distribution systems. For public health, the JP provides funding to address the New York State Department of Health's August 2020 new maximum contaminant level for 1,4-dioxane of 1 part per billion. The JP also provides funding to address lead contamination, particularly on customer-owned service lines that connect residences to the company-owned distribution mains. The JP requires Liberty to explore integrating electric vehicles and renewable power for company operations, promote water conservation efforts by its customers, improve pump efficiency in its infrastructure by installing pumps that use less electricity, and track its progress for such projects. Relatedly, the JP's provisions require Liberty to include a plan in its next rate case to mitigate water supply, water quality, and infrastructure issues attributed to climate change impacts. The JP also includes an overall $13.3 million capped budget to address cybersecurity upgrades and provides $48.7 million for Liberty's Customer First program, which consists of improvements to certain business processes and computer systems. The JP provides for the continuation and enhancement of its customer service performance incentive mechanisms, which consist of a customer satisfaction survey metric and a complaint rate mechanism, which are applicable to the company's entire combined service territory, with accompanying negative revenue adjustments. Importantly, the JP establishes a low-income customer assistance program. Following in the Commission's adoption of Veolia's joint proposal in June, This JP allows for low-income assistance being available to all of the customers of New York's two largest private water service companies. Under the cap, eligible customers will receive a monthly discount equivalent to the monthly meter charge. Qualifying customers can also receive a $100 monthly arrearage forgiveness of up to $1,200 a year for each timely budget payment made if they have a minimum of $300 in arrears of at least 45 days, they participate in the company's budget billing plan, and they pay their agreed monthly budgeted amount. The company will also grant CAP participants whose service is shut off due to non-payment a once-per-year reconnection fee waiver. The JP further provides for the implementation of an enhanced water conservation program, including public outreach to increase knowledge and awareness of accessible conservation measures and programs, an Eye on Water app that provides customers with AMI meters access to real-time data concerning their water usage and suspected leaks, the provision of water conservation kits to customers, high-use customer water audits to provide ratepayers information concerning their water usage and water use recommendations, reduction recommendations, and savings, irrigation system incentives to encourage customers to purchase certain irrigation equipment upgrades, and lead audits for low-income customers. With water supply conservation in mind, the JP provides for an inclining rate structure where it has not yet been implemented. This rate structure is designed to discourage discretionary usage, particularly lawn watering or other outdoor use. However, the JP also requires the company to study whether its conservation rates inadvertently impact households with indoor-only water usage and to address any unintended impacts to those customers. In conclusion, the joint proposal is supported by the record and in the public interest. It offers multi-year rate certainty to the company and its customers. It includes customer service performance incentives and an earning sharings mechanism, as well as several health and safety-related provisions. It advances important policy goals balanced against the impact of the recommended rate increases on ratepayers and ensures the company's continued ability to provide safe and reliable water service at just and reasonable rates. Thank you. We are available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Judge Kersey. I don't have any questions, and I think for the most part my comments from earlier would be echoed again, so I'll save the transcriptionist the effort of retyping what I said earlier, but ultimately I find this to be a good compromise in terms of advancing state's policies, public health and safety, and ensuring that we can continue providing the service needed. So thank you for your work in putting this together and bringing it before us today. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Judge Kersey. Excellent job with your first presentation. I have a feeling you'll be back before us again in the future with other rate cases. I also find this joint proposal to be in the public interest. I would just make one very, very quick point, no question, but the issue of municipalization, which I know has been of interest to Nassau County, many Nassau County residents for a very, very long time. I want to thank the staff for the report that staff did a while ago that found those efforts to be both feasible and desirable from a customer perspective. Certainly reiterate what you had said in regard to the legislature's interest in the creation of two water authorities in Nassau County, and I certainly agree with your statement, and I also found no evidence in this record that would show that the potential rate increase that we will consider momentarily would impact any municipalization negotiations in any way. So to those who continue to be interested in municipalization in Nassau County, I see nothing in this order that would impede those efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Kersey, and congratulations on your first presentation, and thank you for your thoroughness. I do have a few questions. The first set I'm going to ask in a cluster of three. which you might want to answer as a single question. What percentage of the average customer's Liberty utility bill goes towards paying property tax or other local taxes on the company? And then how does that level of taxation compare to other major investor-owned utilities in New York, and what drives the difference?
I'm going to refer that question to Jeff Hogan.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. So what I heard was, in your three-part question, was what percentage of customers' bills is made up of property taxes? And so
Right.
for part one, so there's two different service areas, Service Area 1 and Service Area 2. For Service Area 1, by the end of this rate plan, approximately 31% of all money paid by customers will be going towards property taxes. For Service Area
31%?
31%, yes.
Yeah.
For Service
Yeah.
Area 2, it's 28% for all customers. On average, those are both average numbers. For Service Area 2, Judge Kersey's pointed out that Seacliff has even higher property taxes than average, and there's actually a surcharge that was mentioned. And so, the Seacliff area customers experience even higher than that average. Of course, that would mean that some customers experience a little bit lower. And for Service Area 1, the property taxes were a major driver in what's leading to the rate increase. So that covers, I think, part one of your question. You asked what other New York utilities experience in terms of percentage of bills that are property taxes.
Yeah.
For the major electric and gas utilities in New York, there's a range. It's a little bit lower upstate than it is downstate. It's generally 4 or 5% at the lowest, up to about 18% for Con Edison. So we have here a situation where we're talking about double the statewide average for for property taxes. And you also asked what could be done about this situation, what I believe maybe causes this situation. What
drives the differences?
What drives the difference? I'd say the primary driver of the difference is the different taxation that occurs in Nassau County and New York City in terms of having a special class of taxable entities. They have a class that's only utilities, and they're able to essentially target utilities with higher rates of taxation than other commercial enterprises or residential assets. So you have a situation where the utilities can be burdened with more tax than they would be outside of New York City or Nassau County. So that's why you see the Con Ed numbers being high, and here you have the Liberty Water numbers being higher.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now let me ask this. Are we legally obliged to approve cost recovery for payment of property taxes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, these taxes are a necessary cost of doing business, and we are required to allow the utilities to recover those from their customers.
Yeah. Okay. So Commissioner Valesky mentioned the municipalization study, and he characterized it. Do you agree with his characterization, or would you add anything? Or how would you characterize it? Yeah.
I think Commissioner Valesky's summary and was spot on with what the study found.
If I could just add one additional piece of information there. The staff study did indeed find that there are a variety of scenarios where it's feasible for municipalization to make sense. At the time the study was released, interest rates were a lot lower than they are now. And as a matter of fact, in the numbers that staff used to come up with the dollar impacts of how much how much lower customers' bills could be, the interest rate assumed was 2.3%. And we're in a situation now where we're at 5% probably plus for similar debt. So that would, but there's other factors that would be moving as well, including what the purchase price of the utility would be or the assets.
Okay. Are municipal water companies subject to property tax?
They are not.
They are not.
Nor are
They
they
are not.
subject to state or federal income tax.
Okay. So a difference between the rate of a private company, as we're discussing today, versus how much somebody who gets water from a municipal company is in part different because a private company is subject to local taxation. Is that correct?
Yes, and unlike an investor-owned utility whose source of income is ratepayers, municipal utility providers have access to funding such as local taxes.
So let me make sure I have this right. So in this case, if you're paying your utility bill and you're a Liberty customer, you're paying you're basically a revenue to the local government. Whereas if you were a customer of a municipal water company, the local government is helping to pay for that local company through taxation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you know if any local taxes collected from Liberty customers go to support any other municipal water company?
I'm going to defer to Jeff Hogan on that.
Commissioner, it would be difficult for us to know that. We can't know with certainty if that's the situation. We would have to do an audit of the municipal utilities to check to see whether or not the costs of the municipal utility are being entirely borne by its customers, or is there some sort of subsidization going on? For instance, is all of the human resources activity being done at a town or village or county level? And those costs may not be shared at the utility level. They might not be being raised at the utility level. So we can only state that we don't know, but it is theoretically possible.
Okay. Just one last question, a little different. Does this order, did I read it correctly, that it rejects the company's plan for management, which is to say non-union incentive compensation?
The company didn't seek recovery of executive incentive compensation, so those costs aren't included. They did seek recovery of management non-union incentive compensation. Staff objected to that request, given the lack of a study supporting the compensation. The JP provides for the company to conduct a study during the first year of the rate plan at shareholders' expense. And then the company can then petition the commission during the first year of the rate plan to recover the management incentive compensation if the commission approves. And if the commission approves the amounts that would be recovered from ratepayers, I believe there's slightly less than $2 million in each of rate year 2 and 3.
And just to clarify, so that means that there will be no management compensation available to the company in rate year 1. That study that they would perform would only be prospective in nature for rate years 2 and 3.
Okay. No management incentive compensation, not no management compensation at all, right?
Right. Management incentive compensation.
All right. Okay. The reason I asked about that is I think that the answer illustrates how
Commissioner
we were able to.
Majori,
Yes.
I'm sorry, something happened with your mic.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Now we can.
All right. Maybe I moved away from it. I apologize. Well, let me just say this. I think it's very obvious that the big culprit of this rate driver here has to do with local taxation, and there's a nexus between the reason that this rate increase is large and the reason that the issue of municipalization has not been resolved. Obviously, I think the local governments that are receiving revenue through taxation of the utility at a greater rate, as Jeff mentioned, that then they are taxing other entities that they're paying taxes to, needs to be resolved before municipalization will come to pass and property tax won't be a factor. I don't see that as happening on the horizon. So I'm going to vote in favor of this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bright?
Thank you, Chair. I'm staying on the municipalization track here. So a number of the comments on the record, people were saying that their neighbors were paying less. And can you just talk about, I mean, because, I think Commissioner Majori just alluded to those reasons, but just want to get your take on that as well.
I think part of that is that Liberty's service territory is, it doesn't align well with the different taxing jurisdictions' boundaries, and so it is possible for neighbors or folks you would consider neighbors, people in not too distant proximity from one another, to be on a municipally owned water system, whereas the other is on Liberty's water system.
And the municipalization report was done some time ago, but maybe not, but there hasn't been...
2021, I believe.
Oh, okay, so that's not too long, but there hasn't been any takers yet. Is that true?
So again, municipalization wasn't an issue in the rate case, but from what we gathered during the evidentiary phase of the proceedings is that the authorities have been pursuing settlement negotiations. They've been ongoing. With respect to one of the authorities, it seemed that they had advanced further in negotiations than the other, but neither of the two have reached any sort of agreement with regard to taking over the Liberty systems.
Got it. Okay, so those were really my main questions. It seems like, Liberty was in front of the commission 7 years ago, some time ago, and the major rate drivers, other than taxes, are sort of the advanced metering infrastructure, lead service line replacement, a newly regulated toxin, it sounds like, and then also water conservation measures. And it's great. I just want to make one more comment that it's really just great that we're seeing our actions that we took with Veolia are showing up again here for Liberty in them instituting a low-income program. So thank you so much for all your hard work and for your presentation, Judge Leary.
Thank you.
Kersey.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sheehan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Judge Kersey, Judge Lee Cakes. I also want to thank the parties. I know there are company representatives here as well on what I believe is a settlement that is in the public interest. Since my colleagues have covered municipalization, I won't have to go there. I did want to cover a couple of things, echoing Commissioner Bright. Very happy to see the inclusion of the low-income customer assistance program, as similar, taking the page from the Veolia case from June. I just really want to support that continuing effort in future water cases. The other thing that I think is notable too is the customer service performance incentives being included here, and the potential for negative revenue adjustments in the case of customer service performance dropping below agreed to metrics. So I really wanted to highlight those, as well as the enhanced water conservation programs. Obviously, these are going to be important for adapting to climate change, the water conservation program, and I want to acknowledge that as an important element of this also. So I think that's all I had to say. I will be supporting the order. Thanks again.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Villova?
Thank you. I have no questions. Thank you to the ALJs and the staff and stakeholders who participated in this proceeding. My colleagues have asked all of the questions that I would have wanted to ask today, so I'll say generally that I think the joint proposal represents a reasonable compromise between the parties, and that the expenditures are necessary for the company to continue providing safe and adequate and reliable service at just and reasonable rates, and also includes beneficial programs like the customer service performance incentives, water efficiency, and the customer assistance program. So I will be voting yes. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now do a call for vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to adopt the terms of the joint proposal as discussed. Commissioner Valesky, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Bright?
Yes.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes.
Commissioner Villova?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you all. And with that, we will now take a 10-minute break. My watch says 12:40 p.m. We'll return at 12:50. Thank you. Welcome back. We are continuing our session for today with our third item for discussion, item 301, case 24-E-0364, which establishes a proceeding for proactive electrification planning. It'll be presented by Skylar Madison with Zorai Hagos and Stephanie McDermott, available for questions. Skylar, please begin.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Christian and Commissioners. My name is Skylar Madison. I serve as the Clean Energy Planning Lead here at DPS, and I'm here today to present item 301. The draft order before you, if adopted, would initiate a new proceeding regarding proactive planning for upgraded electric grid infrastructure. The need for this new proceeding was identified through the research, development, and stakeholder engagement that occurred within the medium and heavy-duty vehicle electrification proceeding, and initially contemplated in the electric vehicle supply equipment and infrastructure proceeding. In those proceedings, staff and stakeholders identified a disconnect between how new loads related to electric vehicle charging arrive on the grid and how the associated expansion or upgrade of the grid are planned and implemented. The disconnect was as follows. It turns out that it is very easy to add electric load to the system, but far more difficult and time-consuming to add the grid capacity. For example, a fleet owner could go buy electric vehicles to replace their internal combustion vehicles with little to no advanced planning. This process could take days to months, depending on the fleet size and vehicle class, adding new load to the system very quickly. In some instances, the new load at the charging site for those vehicles may exceed current infrastructure capabilities, and a load letter, or a request for new or increased electrical service at a given location, must be submitted to the local utility, triggering a process where utilities study the local electric system to determine if any new grid upgrades are necessary to enable the charging of the new vehicles. The study process and the process of upgrading the grid infrastructure, such as bringing a new feeder or upgrading a transformer, could take multiple years. This time frame is far longer than the time required to actually make the switch to an electric vehicle and adds uncertainty to the vehicle transition process. For fleet owners planning the decarbonization of their vehicles, driven by state policy, this additional time could increase costs and delay vehicle electrification, slowing our timelines for decarbonization. With numerous state policies regarding vehicle electrification, this will not be an isolated issue and will require advanced planning for new loads to avoid delays for fleet owners. This is not the full scope of the issue, however. After further stakeholder engagement and outreach to utilities, staff identified that these same issues arise for building owners seeking to decarbonize their facilities through electrification as well. The process for a building owner responding to a state policy or a corporate mandate to purchase or install new electric heating, cooling, cooking, or other equipment at their facility is also fairly straightforward and can occur on a timeline of weeks to months. But from our current grid planning perspective, those loads are essentially the same as the electrical vehicle loads. If the facility is likely to require an increase to their electrical service, they must submit a load letter to the utility, initiating that same study and upgrade process we discussed earlier, which could take years. Needless to say, the timeline delay and cost uncertainty related to grid upgrades can make business planning, investment decisions, and retrofits difficult to complete. And from a utility perspective, this popcorn process of new loads popping up across their service territory, initiating study after study, and sometimes overlapping with areas that only received upgrades quite recently, can be very difficult and very inefficient and very expensive. Given the state's policy targets and advancements in clean energy technologies, this difficulty will only increase through time without a change. The draft order before you would launch a new proceeding that would take these problems head on, creating a proactive planning process for upgrading electric grid infrastructure. With this action, New York utilities will get ahead of the issue, identifying areas where new loads will arise and proactively deploying grid upgrades to accelerate the deployment of clean energy across the state. As part of the medium and heavy duty proceeding, numerous stakeholders commented on the need to get ahead of electrification for fleets, electric vehicles in general, and building electrification. 36 initial and 11 written reply comments were filed in response to the initiating order in the medium and heavy duty electric vehicle proceeding. Environmental Defense Fund and CalSTART presented proactive planning approaches along with Con Edison and National Grid during technical conferences in November of 2023. Stakeholders identified the issues we discussed earlier, where investments in decarbonization may be jeopardized or delayed by the extended grid study and upgrade timelines associated with existing processes. Furthermore, EV and building electrification impact each other, and there is synergy to be found by combining forecasts and planning processes for both sectors. For example, if a utility plans an upgrade to enable more electric vehicle charging in an area, that upgrade plan will likely be insufficient if they do not include the background load growth from building and other transportation electrification in that same area. Given the dynamics of ordering new transformers, planning electrical upgrades, and completing system plans, upgrading that same piece of equipment multiple times over just a few years is a very expensive and inefficient process. We do not want the utilities to have to buy 2 transformers for every 1 transformer that must be upgraded, or worse, a new piece of equipment for every study and every new load that comes online. In initial studies presented by the utilities, the expected long-term load growth driven by electrification in certain locations throughout the state could be the equivalent to the demand of a small city, particularly in areas where fleets are clustered or locations where future charging load is anticipated to grow significantly, such as at highway rest stops, as was highlighted in National Grid's electric highway study. The new loads we're discussing are fairly predictable, but very local, requiring new forecasting methods and data analysis in order to plan for and build the most efficient and timely utility infrastructure. Fortunately, there are many new data sources that have been or are being developed that can support this proceeding. To be a little bit more specific, this draft order initiates a new proceeding to develop and implement proactive utility planning processes for both vehicle and building electrification across all of New York State. The first step of the process is to create the planning framework that utilities will use to identify the needed infrastructure investments. The draft order directs the utilities to develop and file within 120 days a study framework, including a detailed timeline, data needs, and analysis methodology that would account for the growth of new electric loads in their territory and identify grid infrastructure needs that would be required to serve that load. The first filing will also include proposals for how costs should be allocated, how the risks of over or underbuilding are accounted for, and the metrics and characteristics by which the projects should be evaluated. Second, the draft order directs the utilities to evaluate and file a proposal for how the granular bottoms-up analysis can be integrated with a broader top-down analysis that is occurring within the coordinated grid planning process, which is particularly relevant within the nodal system modeling occurring in Stage 2 of the CGPP. Third, the draft order acknowledges that load growth driven by electrification is happening now. New loads have come onto the system and continue to come onto the system all the time. Stakeholders and the utilities discussed this fact during our technical conferences, in which Con Edison and National Grid presented draft proactive planning analyses, which examined parts of their service territory where clusters of fleets and electric vehicle charging demand are expected to drive load growth in advance of the development of the planning framework within this proceeding. This fact necessitates a separate approach for these current urgent electrification needs, and the draft order directs the utilities to file within 90 days proposals for urgently needed grid infrastructure that must enter construction before the expected conclusion of this new proceeding's first study cycle, which is based on this, the timelines outlined in the draft order is expected to be around early 2026. Importantly, these urgent projects require their own evaluation process, which must use more stringent criteria for approval to ensure that ratepayers are protected, and only the most needed projects proceed outside the unified planning process that will be developed in parallel. While the urgent upgrade projects will be developed by the individual utilities, the proactive planning framework developed in the first filing will bring all the utilities together, aligning their methods, data, and study timelines into one coordinated state process. This will allow all the utilities and the electrification process projects within their territories to proceed on one shared timeline and will provide the Commission with a uniform set of proposals and results that will be on a level playing field, allowing for the consideration of all grid upgrade needs simultaneously. With the unification of this planning process and the coordinated grid planning process, or CGPP, we will create one overarching planning process, starting with Cycle 2 of the CGPP in 2026, where all of the statewide electrification, transmission, distribution, renewable, and clean energy needs are considered in one single integrated resource planning process. Initiating this proactive planning process, as described in the draft order before you, positions New York at the forefront of the industry through the development of an innovative approach to utility planning that we expect will be used as a model for other states across the country. Thank you for your time this morning, and Zorai Hagos, Stephanie McDermott, and I are now available for questions.
Thank you, Skylar. Appreciate the presentation and the work that's gone into this. You know, in hearing you talk, I want to clarify something in case some are left with the impression we just figured this out. We did not. In fact, this particular proceeding has been quite some time in development, and the cases you referenced earlier, I think they began 2016 or 18, somewhere almost a decade ago in some ways. So this has been, we've known this problem was coming, and I think the challenge with building assets in the right way to adapt to an evolving landscape that we cannot predict is understanding when something can be used and useful. Because at the end of the day, that's what the Commission ensures our investments are, used and useful. We can't proactively build out the largest, the biggest, the best, and gold plate the system in advance of some potential future that we don't know when will arrive. We have to build it as it's needed, and that not just helps ensure the reliability of the system, but the affordability of the system as it's being built out. So I look at this as very timely, you know, for many of the reasons you mentioned. There's a significant increase in the need for number of and size and scope of investments needed for both electrifying transportation and building sector. And as you pointed out, the timeline for doing so can be very long. However, I could go out and buy an EV today. In fact, all of us could, and may consider that. So we need to be in a position where we can accurately predict and plan, and I think this proceeding puts us in a position to do that, not just for an individual utility, but for all utilities in the state. And that gives us consistency, something someone in Long Island, upstate New York City, can expect and predict the same kind of outcomes, not just for that at individual level, but for building owners, developers, fleet owners, everyone looking to electrify. This puts us in a position to better prepare all our assets to meet the growing needs and demands of ratepayers and consumers. So thank you for putting this before us. I think this is very, very timely and much needed. Commissioner Valesky.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Mr. Chair. It's certainly timely, it's well needed, and it seems to be one of those examples that sometimes this commission takes up some of the most important work after the room half empties out. Interesting how that happens, isn't it? Just one question I have. There's a lot here, obviously, and you've done a great job explaining it and reviewing it with us. And certainly the ultimate goal of unifying the planning process with the coordinated grid planning process. But the reports that will be asking the utilities for 120 days, the 90-day emergency report, can you just explain, so when and how do we re-engage as a commission? What comes back before us? When does it come back before us? How do you envision that looking?
So we expect the commission to be involved in multiple ways as we move through the next year or so. So the most urgent filing is expected to come within 90 days of if the order is approved, where the utility will be filing these very urgent projects. We heard about a couple of them through our stakeholder process and through the technical conferences, where National Grid and Con Edison have already identified projects that may need to enter construction within the next year or so. So those urgently needed projects would come within about 90 days, and then we'd be able to evaluate the need to fund those projects at that time. The Commission would also be engaged once the utilities file their planning framework and their suggestions for how to integrate it with the CGPP. That's something where the Commission would evaluate the plan, the appropriateness of that plan, and the appropriateness of the schedule and timing and methods of integrating that with the CGPP. Commission will be further engaged later on as well once the plan has been proposed and approved and we've actually been able to move through an entire planning process. That planning process is expected to result in greater than zero projects, most likely. And so if there are projects arising out of that planning process that are identified where investments are needed to enable this type of electrification, those projects would be presented to the Commission in either through rate cases or through this proceeding itself as projects for funding. And at that time, the Commission would evaluate those for funding.
Suffice to say, much more to come soon.
Much more.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. Just one question, sort of building on the comments.
Commissioner Majori,
Yeah.
we're having trouble hearing you. Can you check your
Okay.
mic?
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to ask one question, building on the point of timeliness that was raised both by the chair and Commissioner Valesky. And I think I know the answer, but I want to give you the opportunity to expand on this. Why haven't we done this already?
No, that's a valid question. The proceeding arose from a lot of the previous work we had been doing, going all the way back to the late 2010s, where we were developing the electric vehicle proceedings, but really starting with the July 2020 Make-Ready order, where we had identified some significant differences between planning for transportation loads versus traditional electric system planning, and how there was kind of some conflicts there in the ways the loads show up and how to plan for those loads. So at that time, which is more than 4 years ago now, we asked for a technical conference, which was then held in 2021, to really get into more detail about what are those conflicts, how are the utilities currently planning to remedy those conflicts, and we learned a lot from those technical conferences, and we built that learning and that engagement into the 2023 proceedings that were launched through the medium heavy duty order. And in that order, we actually carved out a special section explicitly dedicated to getting stakeholder feedback on proactive planning, on the needs and the methods to go forward. And we got, as I mentioned before, about 47 separate sets of comments on that proceeding and the reply comments that really informed us as to the very specific needs and the granular frameworks that are actually required to do this. That gave us enough certainty and confidence to really initiate the order that you see before you today.
Thank you very much.
If I could just add some national context, Commissioner Majori. The U.S. Department of Energy and Department of Transportation's Joint Office on Energy and Transportation in March of this year released a national zero emissions freight corridor strategy. And in that strategy, it laid out a sequence of phases in terms of development that needs to occur for hubs, corridors connecting hubs, and then the expansion of the corridors across the nation. And part of that strategy includes cooperating with the utility planning processes and regulators in the states. And just in July, the Department of Energy hosted a workshop focused on proactive planning specifically, where it gathered regulators and practitioners from across the country who are really actively looking at this problem right now. And to just echo something Skylar said earlier, looking at the state of play, this is really the perfect moment for this type of initiation of this type of planning process. And it really, this order would put New York right at the forefront, right at the cutting edge of the work that is now starting to build momentum nationally.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for that answer. That's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright.
Thank you, Skylar, for this great presentation, and to Stephanie and Soraya, of course, as well. So I don't think I have any questions. I mean, I especially appreciate that we're seeing a need here, and in this case, infrastructure development, especially around large fleets being a bottleneck, and responding to this in a system-wide and a statewide way rather than in an incremental way. So while we're seeing infrastructure of large fleets may have initiated this, us digging a little bit deeper, we are seeing buildings and transportation electrification happening at an accelerated rate. Maybe I should ask that as a question. Are we seeing electrification of buildings and transportation happening at an accelerated rate? And so we're really trying to be more strategic about our investments in areas where we're seeing some large load growth showing up. That's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We had fairly stable both peak and average load growth over the last 5 or 10 years, but as we see fleets responding to both our policies and national policies, we see large, very chunky popcorn type loads popping up around the state that might be 5, 10, 20 megawatts at a time, which is a very significantly sized load. And then just all this background load from our accelerated growth of our electric vehicles, just personal electric vehicles, as well as the sales of heat pumps are taking off in the state as well, adding a lot of this background load that we need to start planning for.
Which is like good news, bad news. So we're ramping up our utility infrastructure upgrades for newly increasing and accelerated electric load based on a layered planning process, which is what we're doing now. And so I really appreciate all the hard work, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Skylar, Zerai, Stephanie, for your work on this. It's, as everyone has said, it's exciting. I'm excited to get this off the ground. I just have a couple questions that I think would be helpful just for the record. Skylar, can you talk a little bit about how we're going to define urgent projects and what we can expect to see when we get the urgent filing?
Absolutely. That is kind of just a generic term. We try to define that so that it's clear to both the utilities and those that are going to be evaluating it why we need a special designation for urgent. This really arose from our technical conference learnings, where we learned of multiple projects throughout National Grid and Con Edison territory at least, where even though they're very supportive of this type of a planning proceeding taking off, they know these types of projects, for example, Zarega Avenue in downstate New York and a couple of areas around Syracuse, these are areas that might need investment in the next year. We might need to begin construction before we could even really get their full planning process all the way through for the first time, much less approved. And so these are kind of urgent needs that we've tried to define as what are projects that cannot wait to enter construction until the end of this planning process. In an ideal world, we could start this planning process and we don't have to look at anything until we have all the projects batched together. But as we mentioned, this load growth has been happening even in the background as we've been trying to get this order together, try to get the full planning framework together. And we just saw the need for maybe a handful of projects across the state that we're aware of that may need action ahead of that.
And then just we talked about buildings and electric vehicles. Can you just speak to the economic development potential here too, and whether it's data centers or superconductors, for example?
No, that's a great point. There's a lot going on in that background electrification that's happening. A lot of new loads coming in. I would say there's a couple of ways this is implicated. So a lot of the largest types of loads, the 50, 100 megawatt plus loads that might be coming into the system, they're likely to be captured under the coordinated grid planning process because they often have transmission level interconnections. But to the extent that we do see significant adoption of new electricity loads, new loads coming onto the system on the distribution network, those will have to be incorporated into the distribution scale load forecast that the utilities will use to identify these infrastructure planning upgrades. Because as we mentioned, if we're trying to electrify one fleet that needs 5 megawatts, but a 2 megawatt new load is being built next door, you can't just build a 5 megawatt substation. You need to meet that entire load for your system.
Great. That's it. I think the only other thing I wanted to say is that I do think that coordination with the coordinated grid planning process is going to be essential. I loved hearing you talk about integrated energy planning, which I think is really where we need. So I'm excited about what's to come. Thank you again for your work on this.
Thank you. Commissioner Vlhova.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for your great work in this order. I think it's well structured and offers a lot for us to think about as we've already discussed today. I have a few follow-up questions. One is related to Commissioner Sheehan's question on how we define the urgent projects. Just to clarify my own understanding, these are projects that are closed or already have received permitting. They've already requested energization or interconnection. They're going to happen. They're not in the queue waiting review. Is that right? Or is it not clear yet?
I would say we don't have all the answers on that right now. Part of the characterization of urgent projects will be what the utilities are actually proposing to the Commission as part of those projects. We would like them to identify what is most urgent, why do you think this is most urgent, and give us all the proof that this is an urgent project. So we have all of that in front of us, rather than us saying, any projects that need to start construction in the next 2 years. That's actually more open than having them come back to us and prove that this is something that's very urgent. I would say that the ones that we know about, the ones that were presented at the technical conferences, are things where the entity involved is already in contact with the utility. So we already have a very good sense of those loads. So at least for the ones we're aware of, I would say we are pretty confident in those showing up. But there may be others, and we're going to have the utilities kind of justify that in the filing.
I'd just like to also call out some perhaps subtle but very important language in the order to, I think, could respond to this question. For the urgent projects, the draft order directs the utilities to be specific in highlighting how specific risks are addressed, and it allows the utilities to expand upon the list of risks that are in the draft order, but certainly the risk of certainty, timing, both over or undershooting, in terms of what you're building up to right now. And that will give the Commission, when those proposals come back, hopefully a really well thought through record and rationale for making decisions. But doesn't say that you have to accept the rationale, but it is specific in requesting that type of analysis and defense of the projects, and it was done really for that specific reason.
Thank you. That's great. That fully addresses my concern, which was exactly that. How do we know that these projects will in fact materialize? Will the commission have the opportunity to review the utilities' proposed forecasting methodologies, including their underlying inputs and assumptions? The methodologies that they will use specific to the proactive planning process?
Yes, then that's actually one of the most important aspects of this whole thing, is really trying to fill that gap that we think exists right now in terms of like really granular, longer term forecasting for EVs and building electrification. So this can be a critical piece of this whole thing. And as part of the filing that's requested 120 days from now, the utilities will be proposing those different load forecasts, those planning methodologies. So we'll have at least, a few times we can look at this where we're evaluating proposals from the utilities, but also in the actual development process of the planning framework. We expect to have some more back and forth with the utilities on specifically what data sets are most relevant here.
Great, thank you. And my last question is a point of clarification on the urgent project category. Will the proposals for the grid upgrades for the urgent projects include cost allocation framework for those projects separate from the cost allocation framework that will be developed for the long-term planning?
Yes, so the order requests that the utilities provide for the urgent projects a separate cost allocation methodology, separate evaluation framework, because these are kind of a unique category of projects that we don't expect to see this really much again, but we have, since we're kicking this project off for the first time, there may be projects that are kind of in the works already. So yes, there's going to be a separate framework proposed for these projects.
Thank you. Well, overall, I think that, as I said, the order does a great job spelling out what all of the major issues are that we need to consider in order to, as Chair Christian was saying earlier, make sure that we're right-sizing the proactive investments with the load that we anticipate coming online. So I really appreciate it, and I will be voting in favor.
Thank you. And with that, we'll do a call for vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to commence a proactive planning proceeding as discussed. Commissioner Valesky, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Villova?
Yes.
Thank you. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you, everyone, for your work in bringing this to the Commission. We now move to our fourth item for discussion. Item 302, case 14-M-0565, as it relates to implementation of the Energy Affordability Guarantee Pilot. This will be presented by Chris Cole. Jordan Lesser, Kyle LaBelle, and Richard Berkeley are all available for questions. Chris, please begin. Oh, and before, we should make sure everyone's nameplate is accurate. All right, thank you.
Okay, sorry for that technical difficulty. Good afternoon, Chair and the Commissioners. Are we good? Thank you. So this afternoon I'll be presenting on item number 302 in the case 14M-0565 on the Energy Affordability Guarantee Pilot. Before I begin, I want to borrow on a theme from our last item, and that is electrification. In this case, home electrification, as it relates to low-income households. So, when we think about home electrification, we're really talking about the conversion of space and water heating from combustion appliances to heat pump technologies. And this is really important in the low-income space because we currently lack a lot of detail on what heat pump conversion might mean in terms of operating costs, energy burden, what typical heat pump configurations might look like, the installation costs, and importantly, the motivations of and experiences of low-income households when they do electrify. Right. So as we look to develop policies and programs to simultaneously advance the Commission's energy affordability policy, as ensuring that low-income customers pay no more than 6% of their annual household income towards their utility bills, as well as address the the state's important energy and environmental goals outlined in the CLCPA, it's going to be important that we find solutions to answer these kind of important questions we have on how to electrify in the low-income space. One important opportunity for us to do that right now is the Energy Affordability Guarantee pilot. So by way of background, the fiscal year 2024 state budget included a provision directing the department to establish a guarantee for low-income customers that fully electrify their space and water heating through the Empower Plus program, which is administered by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, to ensure that those households pay no more than 6% of their annual income towards their electricity bills. The 2024 state budget also outlined several additional parameters for this guarantee. So first, the department should establish a cap on the amount of electricity that would be subject to the guarantee, that the guarantee shall last for the life of the installed heat pump technology. In this case, we're estimating 15 years, as that's established in the New York State Technical Resources Manual, which establishes energy savings methodologies and calculations for energy efficiency measures, as well as the effective useful life of those measures. And lastly, that the guarantee can transfer to new households in the event that current recipient moves from the home in which was electrified. The guarantee was subsequently funded through a budget appropriation in the fiscal year 2025 state budget in the amount of $50 million. So this includes funding for the guarantee, for the provision of the guarantee, as well as funding for the department to implement the guarantee. So up to 3% of those dollars appropriated can be used by the department for such purposes. So in response to the directive in the state budget, staff developed and filed a staff report on April 29th of this year that outlines recommendations for the development of an initiative to effectuate the guarantee. So including that the guarantee be delivered as part of a pilot initiative with two distinct phases. Right? So the first phase, over the first 2 years of the pilot, we would really look at data collection, so enrolling households into the pilot, collecting data on their operating costs, energy burden, experiences with heat pumps. And then over the balance of the 15 years, this would be kind of just the provision of the guarantee. Right. So we're really kind of looking to establish a baseline for, customer experiences when they do electrify. Further, the staff report identifies three key objectives for this pilot initiative. So the first is to mitigate the potential for an increase in household energy cost burdens because of the electrification. Secondly, to provide insights to drive a broader strategy for creating affordable access to heat pump solutions for low-income households, including understanding operating cost considerations for customers when they choose to electrify. Third, we're looking to understand the options for determining customer-specific energy cost burdens and providing tailored bill assistance to customers to achieve energy cost burden reductions and the ultimate goal of a 6% energy burden. Specific pilot design and implementation considerations include a target to enroll 1,000 participants, and this is based on NYSERDA Empower Plus production estimates over the next year and a half. And staff would work with NYSERDA to ensure that there's an equitable distribution of pilot participants across utility territories and in disadvantaged communities. Eligibility would be set on the Empower Plus eligibility for low-income households, which includes a household income eligibility threshold of 60% of the state median income, which, for reference, for a family of four, that equates to around $76,000 per year, and that's according to the Federal Administration for Children and Families. And the household must, or the participant must reside in a 1 to 4 family home. So after homes are identified and electrified through Empower Plus and enrolled in the pilot, electricity consumption will be monitored for each participating customer on a monthly basis, and the guarantee will be calculated and applied on a monthly basis if needed. In this respect, the guarantee serves as a backstop against the potential for an increase in electric consumption as a result of heat pump use to also increase household energy burden beyond 6%. If a participant experiences an electricity bill greater than 6%, they will receive the guarantee in that month. If their bill in that month does not exceed 6%, then they would not receive the guarantee. The amount of electricity consumption that would be covered by the guarantee will be capped at 150% of the average consumption for low-income customers that heat with electricity in each utility territory. This is referred to as the guarantee limit in the staff report. Staff would monitor electricity consumption and energy cost burden and adjust methodology over time. This flexibility is particularly important because the track record on incremental electric costs, consumption, and associated energy burden just doesn't exist, right, for low-income households at this point. The staff report also recommends that participants should undergo annual recertification to ensure income eligibility and to provide household income data for the purposes of calculating the energy burden for each household and to calculate the guarantee that each participant might need. In the event of a change in occupancy in the dwelling electrified by Empower Plus, the guarantee would be able to be transferred to new residents provided that they are income eligible at the time of enrollment. Lastly, staff would procure an implementation contractor to manage the pilot, including enrollment of participants, managing communications with participants, utilities, and NYSERDA, collecting and analyzing billing data for participants, calculation of the guarantee, and reporting out on pilot outcomes. So with respect to the draft order before you, the draft order approves the implementation of the Energy Affordability Guarantee pilot as outlined in the staff report with modifications based on stakeholder input. 7 parties filed comments on the staff report, including the Alliance for a Green Energy Economy, Blueprint Geneva, the City of New York, the Joint Utilities, the Long Island Progressive Coalition, National Fuel Gas, and the Public Utility Law Project. Notably, the draft order modifies the proposal contained in the staff report in the following ways. The draft order removes the requirement for participants to demonstrate income eligibility on an annual basis once they're enrolled in the pilot. So in this respect, once a household is enrolled, they cannot be disqualified from participation if they experience an increase in income at any point during the pilot. So once they're in, they're in the pilot. However, participants would still need to provide income documentation on an annual basis for the purpose of calculating the energy burden for each household and the guarantee that household may need. The draft order also sets a goal for a minimum of 100 pilot participants in each major electric utility territory and sets an expectation for at least 40% of participants to be located within disadvantaged communities. The draft order also allows for retroactive enrollment of low-income households that had previously been fully electrified through Empower Plus dating back to the enactment of the fiscal year 2024 state budget. So that's approximately May 3rd, 2023. And it sets an enrollment deadline of January 1st, 2026, with the ability for staff to seek an extension on this deadline if enrollment does not reach the 1,000 household mark by the deadline. In acknowledgement that bill payment assistance is only one strategy for advancing electrification while mitigating energy burden increases, the draft order also directs staff to explore additional opportunities for advancing our co-equal objectives of developing solutions for decarbonizing homes, as well as advancing energy affordability for low-income households. However, this work should take place in the energy efficiency and building electrification portfolio under case 18M0084. The draft order also requires staff to consult with the Energy Affordability Policy Working Group on any modifications to the pilot or the implementation plan over the course of the pilot. Also of note, parties commented on the income eligibility thresholds for Empower Plus, particularly the fact that income eligibility is currently set at 60% of the state median income. And that may limit access to program support for residents in parts of the state with higher costs of living. As an alternative, parties recommended that the minimum eligibility for Empower Plus be set at 60% of the area median income or state median income, whichever is higher, depending on what part of the state you're in. Staff notes that the design of Empower Plus cannot be addressed through this pilot or this order. However, parties have provided comments on this issue through the energy efficiency and building electrification proceeding, which will come before the Commission in the near future. The draft order also requires staff to file an implementation plan for the pilot within 60 days of this order. For staff to provide updates on the pilot to the Energy Affordability Policy Working Group on a quarterly basis. For staff to file quarterly pilot status reports for the first 2 years of the pilot, as well as to develop and file an annual report with key insights, analysis, and pilot progress. And lastly, directs the major electric utilities to file temporary tariffs no later than November 1st to effectuate the guarantee, and to file a proposal and plan for cost recovery within 30 days after the filing of the staff implementation plan. The plan for cost recovery would come back to the Commission for action at that time. So in closing, this pilot provides an opportunity for the department to support electrification for low-income households while collecting important data and insights on the impact that heat pump solutions can have on energy bills, as well as how households can benefit from electrification, all while preserving energy affordability by capping participants' energy burden at 6% of household income. Staff expects that the experience and insights gained from this pilot will inform longer-term policy, programs, and strategies for advancing electrification in the low-income market segment. This concludes my presentation. Richard Berkeley, Kyle LaBelle, Jordan Lesser, and I are available for any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation and good work in getting this to us today. I look at this as a continuation of one of many efforts that the Commission has taken on to advance affordability, and I think this is an excellent example of not just taking an action that can have a direct impact on individuals within the state and how they live, where they live, their finances, but also helping us determine what actions we can take in the future regarding how to better develop policy and initiatives to support those favorable outcomes in the future. In hearing your presentation, this sounds to be a very well thought out pilot. The protections for consumers, the length, 15 years, that's significant in and of itself. And I think this proves over time we will find ways to ensure affordability for a wider swath of New Yorkers through this opportunity before us. So thank you for putting this together. And Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you to your team. It's certainly a thorough project. I know you've put a lot of time and attention into it. I don't have anything further to add beyond what the chair has already indicated. Look forward to supporting the order. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori.
I have no questions. I'd echo the sentiments of Commissioner Valesky and the chair, and thank you for your presentation and your good work on this item. And I also plan to support it.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright.
Thanks, Chris. I also have no questions. This looks like a well-designed pilot program. It's responsive to the 2024 budget and fulfills some core Commission priorities of addressing energy cost burdens, as well as ensuring access and a wider adoption of clean energy. So this is great work, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
Sorry, Chris, I have a question.
Go for it.
You prepared, so.
Yeah.
First, thank you very much to all of you who've been working on this. This is a really well thought out pilot design, and I think I love that it's been responsive to stakeholder comments. The question I have, I used to work at the budget division, so my question is, do you think 50 million is enough?
So it's a good question, and the honest answer is we don't know until we start to see, what the actual, energy burdens, electric, consumption profiles look like. Mm-hmm. We did do some modeling and some planning, and it appeared that $50 million would be sufficient. But, once we start to collect data on, how much, energy bills, might go up, then, we'll obviously be able to answer that question better.
And then the other part of that is whether the 3% for administration, because it is complex. There's a lot of steps in this, and so that's sort of baked in there too. Is that the right number? Is that going to be enough for the administration of the program? I think the answer is we don't know yet, but I want to just put that out there as something that I encourage us to track. And because this program is so important and the legislature agrees it's important, this is critical for us to meet the policy goal of 6% annual income towards energy expenses. So I think it's really important that we monitor this closely and communicate the needs as we go.
Point taken. In the reporting that is outlined in the staff report and order will also help us shed light on ongoing operating costs of this project.
Great. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Vlova.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for a great job on the pilot proposal. I have just one clarifying question. What percentage of the Empower Plus program participants would be able to participate in the pilot? Is it everyone, basically?
So any low-income household that fully electrifies would be enrolled in the pilot. Okay, so the Empower production kind of expects to hit around 1,000 low-income households with fully electrified work scopes. So that would be our universe. Yep.
That's great to hear. I think that's a really important aspect of this program that I wanted to highlight. I agree with my colleagues. I think the pilot achieves the intent of the legislature and is a really important effort to make sure that we do everything we can to make electrification affordable for everyone. So I will be supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'll call for a vote. My vote is in favor of adopting the recommendations in the staff report with the modifications as discussed. Commissioner Valesky, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Vlova?
Yes.
Thank you. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we move to our fifth and final discussion item for today. Aptly numbered item 501, case 15-M-0388, as it relates to a proposed settlement agreement with Charter Communications. This will be presented by John Sipos. Debbie LaBelle, Brian Osius, and Vincent Stark are all available for questions. And their name tags are correct. Not quite. There we go. Thank you. All right. John, please begin.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Currently before the Commission in item 501 is a proposed order concerning an investigation and potential enforcement matter. By way of background, in January 2016, the Commission approved the merger of Charter Communications Incorporated and Time Warner Cable Incorporated, subject to various conditions. One such condition in that merger order required Charter to offer a low-income broadband program with the following components. First, as to cost, the cost was to be $14.99 per month. Second, the download speed was to be at least 30 megabits per second. And third, as to eligibility, it was to include customers receiving benefits from the National Free School Lunch Program or those receiving supplemental Social Security income. Following a recent compliance review, DPS staff contend that Charter had violated the low-income broadband condition. Charter disputes staff's position, to be sure. In lieu of expending time and resources litigating this issue, Charter and DPS staff have negotiated a resolution of this issue and have prepared a settlement agreement. Accordingly, today, DPS staff recommends that the Commission approve, and just to be clear, Accordingly, today, DPS staff recommends that the Commission approve an enforcement settlement between staff and Charter that resolves a notice of apparent violation issued on April 5, 2024. And as described, the 2016 merger order included a number of enforceable public interest conditions, including the low-income broadband program just discussed. The NOAV, Notice of Apparent Violation, alleges that Charter increased the price of its low-income broadband program to $24.99 a month without Commission approval, in violation of the 2016 merger order. And as noted, Charter disagreed with that Notice of Apparent Violation. The proposed settlement agreement before the Commission today will require Charter to reestablish the program at $15 per month with speeds of 50 megabits for 4 years, with annual price adjustments for inflation in years 2, 3, and 4. For additional context, staff notes that on June 1, 2024, the Federal Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP, which had provided eligible households with up to $30 per month discount for broadband, expired. That program expired earlier this summer. Also, the state's Affordable Broadband Act, which requires, among other things, that internet service providers offer 25 megabits speed service for $15 per month, is currently suspended within ongoing litigation. And moreover, uncertainty surrounds federal broadband policy given litigation and administrative review. Thus, the takeaway is that at present, the only low-income broadband requirements that currently exist in New York are the low-income program conditions contained in the Commission's previous orders approving certain mergers. Staff submits that the approval of the settlement agreement will promote the public interest, will assist New Yorkers, and will provide accessibility. And by approving the proposed settlement, the Commission will make affordable broadband available to eligible New Yorkers while the litigation is resolved and/or the federal government considers potentially reinstating the Affordable Connectivity Program. Review and approval of the settlement agreement at the August session today will assist eligible New York families with school students who will start classes shortly or who had participated in the recently terminated Federal Affordable Connectivity Program. Before I conclude, there's just one household item I wish to flag for the Commission. In reviewing the draft order just now, we noticed a typographical correction on page 13 on the second full paragraph, the 6th line. The first word should read agreement instead of transfer. And with that correction, we recommend that the Commission approve the draft order. Staff is available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you one more time reference the correction?
Yes. So on page 13 of the draft order, the second full paragraph, the 6th line down, the first word in that line currently reads in the draft transfer, and staff is proposing that word be replaced with the word agreement.
Understood. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So, in looking at this order before us today, what I see is an opportunity to align Charter's posture today with the needs we expressed long ago. And given that outcome, that is the outcome, I am supportive of this item, and I think this is a good outcome. As you point out, the kids will be going back to school, and ensuring affordable internet in a timely manner I think is a win no matter how you look at it. So thank you for working to get this item resolved. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Darn, I can't believe I missed that clarification, John. Better next time. I'll keep a closer eye on things. Thank you again to you and your enforcement team for keeping your eye on the ball, and obviously to your program team. The only thing I would like to add, and I want to single out Tom Congdon, our deputy executive here at the department, and I think Bob Rosenthal, I think you were here at the time. The merger in 2016, I think the only commissioner, none of us were here then. I think Commissioner Alisi may have been on the commission at the time, I'm not sure. But it was just really a landmark case that was taken. And I just reflect on it. Here we are 8 years later. And from an enforcement perspective, finding things that had gone awry from that landmark decision. So really, great work back then, and fast forward to today, great work making sure that the terms continue to be met by the company. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori.
Thank you. John, I'd like to join Commissioner Valesky in apologizing for not catching the typo, which I'm sure expresses the sentiment of my colleagues. Other than that, I think this is a terrific settlement. I think it is going to provide great service to folks who might not otherwise be able to afford broadband, but need to broadband in order to just function in society. So I think this is terrific work. And I would also say that I feel much better about voting yes on the items after we took our break than before. So good work, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Bright.
Thank you, Mr. Sipos, and the enforcement team, and of course, Debbie and the Office of Telecommunications. I have no questions. I first want to thank you for proactively and quickly doing the compliance review after the federal program ended. I think that really was essential in making sure that we recognized what was going on here. And because of your team's hard work, some households who are struggling the most will not see their bills jump. And as Mr. Sipos mentioned, school is starting soon, so this is in the nick of time. And in the absence of the state program, which is currently held up in litigation, and the federal program, which is expiring, as we mentioned, this is the only game in town. So thank you so much for all your hard work, and I'll be supporting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, John. I echo my fellow commissioner comments that I think this is a great settlement, and to everybody who worked on it, congratulations. I think it's really well done. I do have a question maybe for clarification that I just wanted to cover. So when will charter be required to reestablish the program? Effective when?
Our understanding is that it will start to occur by the end of this month, beginning of September.
Great. And then the relationship between this settlement, the state legislation on the Affordable Broadband Act, and if there is a federal program again, or that the federal program is reinstated. Can you just walk us through that?
Yes, and I want to be careful because there is ongoing litigation, and which the Public Service Commission is not the lead litigator on that. That is that law is being defended ably by the New York State Attorney General's office, and they are in the midst of litigation on that right now. But before the federal program and before the Affordable Broadband Act, so both of those occurred in if I could call it, during the COVID era, 2020, 2021. But before that, as Commissioner Valesky, I think, is helping me out on this question here in his observation. So there were a number of mergers in the 2016, 2017 timeframe. And the commission at that time, exercising its authority, did place conditions on those merger orders. And so what we are bringing to the commission today, what OIE and Office of Telecommunications was looking at and doing its compliance review on, really goes back to the 2016 orders. That is the in this case the January 2016 merger order. That is the root of what brings us here today. So there have been state efforts in the legislation, which is continuing. Which is continuing and is continuing in litigation, and there is the termination of the federal program, as I noted earlier this year, and there is also uncertainty about some aspects of the federal broadband policy that the Federal Communications Commission is working through, also in litigation. Out in Cincinnati in the Sixth Circuit. So this is, apart from those issues that have caused perhaps some uncertainty, this is the current game in town, I guess, if you will call it that, and it goes back to this 2016 order, and it is the commission using its authority to advance the public interest today for eligible New Yorkers. It's in some ways it is my personal view, it's a very good solution given the uncertainty that is going on in this area.
I totally agree. I was just trying to establish recognizing uncertainty at the federal level and with the litigation on the state legislation. Is this settlement going to be the controlling document for the next 3 years, regardless of those?
We believe
there's nothing in this settlement that says this is what we're going to do unless state law is reinstated or
right. We believe that this does set the standard for the next 4 years, and there is a opportunity in this agreement that should Charter comply with the Affordable Broadband Act requirements, that would also suffice. And those requirements, again, not getting into the litigation, but those requirements also speak to public interest concerns as well. So from our perspective, it's a win-win for New Yorkers.
Yeah, I totally agree. So thank you for taking the time to walk me through that. And I will be supporting. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Belova.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for the enforcement action and keeping an eye on things and making sure that New Yorkers who otherwise might not be able to access broadband will have access under this program. I don't have anything to add or ask apart from my colleagues. I second what has already been said. Thank you, and I will vote in favor.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now do a call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to adopt the terms of the 2024 agreement as discussed with the additional correction as noted by John Sipos. Commissioner Valesky, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Commissioner Bright?
Yes.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes.
Commissioner Volova?
Yes.
The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you. We will now move to the consent agenda.
Chair, I'm sorry. Could I have 1 or 2 minutes before you move to the consent?
Of course.
Thank you.
We will take a 3-minute break.
Sorry.
And we'll return shortly. are now on the consent agenda. Madam Secretary, do we need to make any adjustments to the consent agenda?
Yes, I'd like to note that we're pulling item 374, it's case 23E0680, from the consent agenda. So it will not be part of your vote.
So noted. Thank you. With that, do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items on the consent agenda, beginning with Commissioner Valesky?
I have no comments or recusals on any item.
Thank you. Commissioner Majori?
I have no comments or questions on the consent agenda. I wouldn't have questions anyway. I have no comments on the consent agenda. I'll vote for the entire consent agenda.
Thank you. Commissioner Bryant?
Thank you. I have no comments on the consent agenda. I will be voting for the full consent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes, I will be recused from items 375 and 376 on the consent agenda, and I have no questions on the remaining items.
Noted. Thank you. And Commissioner Villova?
No questions or recusals.
Thank you. We'll do a call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Valesky, how do you vote?
I vote yes on all items.
Commissioner Majori?
I also vote yes on all items.
Commissioner Bright?
I vote yes on all items.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Yes on all items with the exception of items 375 and 376, from which I am recused.
Thank you. And Commissioner Villova?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Madam Secretary, is there anything else to come before the commission today?
There is nothing more.
Thank you very much, and with that, I adjourn. Thank you, everyone.